Oh, hey, welcome to the Tendo Show. We have a really interesting conversation planned for today. I want to talk about our biggest aspirations, and I'm looking for a conversation today about how perhaps they've changed, gotten smaller, gotten bigger, et cetera, et cetera. So before we even get started with today's episode, comment below and let us know, what is your biggest aspiration in life? What's at the top of the bucket list? Stick around. Okay, I'm not 100% sure how to jump into this conversation. What I'm really thinking about looking at this conversation is how wildly different what I want to do with my life is now compared to when I was a kid, right? Because we live in this culture that just constantly demands of children, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to be? And of course, we had that growing up, right?
Oh, for sure.
You get asked that at every age. What do you want to, even when you're a kid? And of course, when you're a kid, it's a fireman. And when you're a teenager, it's a rock star. And when you're an adult, but I definitely have my own journey with that. And I know you do too. And I'm very interested in us comparing specifically the changes of how those big dreams have changed. And then I want to end the conversation with basically talking about what our real aspirations are now. And I'm very, very interested in this with you guys that are watching and listening. What is it that you want to do with your life, and maybe perhaps even share how it might have changed. But I definitely want to know what you want to be when you grow up, even if you think you're already grown up, because you're probably not. Because I'm turning 32 in, 2 weeks?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. September 5th, someone do the math. And I still have very specific situations where I learn pretty difficult life lessons and go, man, I had a little more growing up to do, and I'm starting to find out that's what life is all about. But Hannah, let's start off with the basics for you. Can you tell the audience what the heck you wanted to be when you grew up, when you were a kid?
When I was like a wee tot.
Your earliest memory of aspiring to anything.
Well, I have a very vivid memory of this one instance. And I remember in the instance, me having to make something up on the fly. I was in preschool, and it was my preschool graduation. And I was so excited that day. It was one of the best days of my life when I was a kid.
You had graduated preschool. You had made it.
Yeah, we got to wear the cap and gown and everything, and we got little certificates. And one of the things during our ceremony was they went around through the class and said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I was like, I mean, I just graduated preschool. This is a lot of pressure. Like, I am literally 5 years old. What are you talking about? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And the teacher was like, just don't worry about it. Just pick something. And I remember picking a dentist because my mom was a dentist. Worked at a dentist office.
So you didn't mean it.
No, I didn't at all.
It's just all you could think of.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know. I didn't exactly know what my dad did at the time. I knew he was like, he worked on airplanes. He's an airplane mechanic. So it's very simple to explain now. But I was like, mom's a dentist worker.
Well, that's a great answer for the start. And I can answer somewhat similarly. Well, not really. I think you'll probably see a pattern here with me. My dreams and aspirations at those earliest ages were wild, man. But I want to say I have very early memories of someone asking what we wanted to be when we grew up, and my dad making sure that we understood that we weren't allowed to be a bricklayer. A bricklayer like he is.
Yeah.
He's a union masonry man. He lays brick, block, stone, anything with stone. And I just remember him being so adamant that we weren't going to do that. He's like, I don't want you to do that. I don't really want you to come work with me on my side jobs. He just very much so didn't want it for us.
Do you know why? Like, was it?
Yeah. Well, at that point, he had already seen his father. Probably the time I was born was about the time my father's father, my grandfather, had a heart attack. Well, it was a little after, because I was just old enough to remember it, and my little brother's not. So at 4 or 5 years old, my grandfather had a heart attack, which kind of debilitated him physically, and he was no longer ever after that able to lay block or brick. So my father and grandfather are both masons, and I think at that point, he had seen his father's body just be torn up, and he was well into a 20-year period of tearing his body up just because it was really rough labor, and they didn't really know how to take care of themselves physically and have a long career. This, as a matter of fact, I don't know if anyone watching knows any brick block layers, but like, it's just real rough work, and they get pretty rough using those same muscles for 30-pound blocks all day.
Yeah, I can
every day.
imagine just like picking up a block, putting it up 1,000,000 times a day.
Yeah.
Like that could be very strenuous.
Yeah, well, you hear a lot of stories about people of our generation with our parents' generation, going through something like that and making their kids go to college or something to do something better. I didn't have that, it was just specifically that. It's like, if you want to roof houses or something else, whatever, fine. But like, I just don't want you to lay brick. So I didn't have any talk about the family business, which very much so was bricklaying. But I don't know that I have any really early memories either of someone just going, "What do you want to be?" and me saying like fireman or something. But I do have really early memories, and I'm talking 6 or 7 years old, of having notebooks and writing songs in them and singing them. And they were ridiculous, as any 6-year-old would write. Matter of factly, I remember one. I remember singing it for my dad and him laughing at me, and because as a bricklayer, just a very stern man. He also didn't understand me, so he had this 6-year-old that was just singing songs, and I sang him a song I wrote about a guy riding a 3-wheeler.
Okay.
And I can't remember now what it was, but someone we knew had a 3-wheeler, and we wrote it or something.
Like a motorcycle, not a big wheel.
Well, no, it was a 4-wheeler, but with 3 wheelers.
Oh, okay.
With 3 wheels.
Yeah.
Not like a tricycle, not a big wheel.
Gotcha.
A 3-wheeler motored vehicle. I don't know if you know this, they're extremely dangerous.
Oh, okay.
A little sharp turn, you go flying. They kill people constantly. Matter of fact, I don't give much advice on this channel, but listen, don't ride a 3-wheeler if you ever get a chance. They're very dangerous. We shouldn't have been on them as kids, but we were. And we, I don't know. I liked the 3-wheeler. I wrote a song about it, and I sang it for my dad. It was awful, and he didn't understand. But I remember very early on, I think that was probably the first thing I wanted to be, was a musician at 6 or 7. So that answers my end of that question. So let's move on. And Hannah, what's the next thing you remember being, or we can kind of fast forward to 10, 12 when you're about to be a teenager and you're a little smarter, and we have really full form memories, right?
Yeah, well, I'll start by, I've actually been considering this quite a bit lately. I've been thinking back on my childhood and going, well, what did I want to be when I grow up? Because like I spent a lot of time dwelling on this situation, because whenever my family, like, I was the youngest of all of my siblings, so I watched all of them having to deal with the same conundrum of like, what are you going to do when you leave high school? How are you going to make a living? How are you going to be an adult? I watched my oldest sister decide to be an accountant, and then my brother be a teacher, and my sister be a nurse. My sister's only 2 years older than me, so I had already kind of figured things out by that time. But I think my most like vivid memory of after the preschool thing, whenever I was like, oh, I'm going to be a dentist, going through elementary school, I don't think I really considered it too much, because I was just like being a kid. I think I wanted to be a writer at some point. Like, I wanted to write books. I sat down in my basement in this little cubby hole area with my best friend at the time, and we had a little notebook, which coincidentally, last time we went home, I went through a bunch of my old papers whenever I was in elementary school, and I found that notebook. But we sat down and started writing a book, and I read the like 2 paragraphs we got through, and I remember if you would have asked me how far we got in that book when I was a kid, I was like, oh, I think we got like 10 or so pages done. We literally got 2 paragraphs done. But we had talked about this book in length and like had all the things planned out, like what it was going to be, what the story was. But we only got through like 2 paragraphs, and I read it, and it was absolute nonsense. It made no sense whatsoever.
That's interesting. You've never told me any of this, so let's keep going back and forth, because I think we're going to find some parallels here. That was the very next thing I knew I wanted to be. I remember being, what was it? I don't know how old. So 5th or 6th grade. So 10 or 11.
Yeah.
About the age we're talking about. And I had the same exact intent. And I don't think I'd read Harry Potter yet, interestingly. So I don't know what I'd read that kind of prompted me to want to do this. But I wrote a book and I finished it. But of course, with the same kind of thing in your head, 20 pages feels like a book, especially when you have you haven't lived. We've lived creative lives now. I've wrote films, commercials, and I've done a lot of writing professionally, and I now know what writing 100 pages looks like, or even more so. I'm very familiar as someone who has spent portions of my life being an aspiring writer. Like, I can tell you that the Harry Potter books, like the first one, I think the first Harry Potter book is, see, now I'm going to get it wrong. I should have looked this up, but I've Googled it several times when I've thought about it. Matter of fact, like, I think the Sorcerer's Stone it's either 70,000 words or like 120, but how many words is the Philosopher's Stone? I didn't even spell it right. I was right. 76,000 words. I was a little bit afraid I was going to get it wrong because, I haven't thought about it a ton lately. But sometimes when I think about a writing idea I'm like, well, how many words do I have to write right now? Because I also know, if you get out a Word document and don't double space, and I have a pretty good idea how many words are on a page. And matter of fact, I don't recommend this, but when you get to writing, I like to leave the word counter on. So, you do the math, 30 chapters, 70,000 words, each page needs to be about this. So, I'm kind of writing each chapter, trying to stretch it out. These are not good habits, but I'm saying this because I wrote a book back then that was probably 5,000 words, and it felt like a novel. Of course, at that age, too, when you read novels, what are they? They're... I don't know.
Maybe 100 pages.
You're a little bit past Berenstain Bears at that point, but they're not very large books. And so at that age, I was the same way. And matter of fact, it's still in my grandmother's upstairs somewhere. I made sure to keep a lot of the paper stuff. I remember what the first story I wrote was. Did you remember before you read it at your mom's house?
Yeah, I remember it being like this. This like love story of a heroine. Like someone trying to save a damsel in distress, like that kind of
very
thing.
typical kind of story that you were used to as a kid.
Yeah.
For me, I was already at that point growing up in this world of Pokemon, Digimon, and probably my story was most influenced by what's it called?
Yu-Gi-Oh.
No, the monsters one, the Monster Ranchers. Because in my story, this guy would find these discs, and he had something that looked a lot like a CD player, but it wasn't. It was like kind of futuristic or past. It was kind of Stone Age or something, but he would put these magical discs in this thing, and each disc he would find would give him powers. Oh. So I think we were probably in a class, in one of my English classes at this point, that was teaching us structure and outlining, and it lit a spark in my brain. So when someone makes up a story, they write down what happens in each chapter, and they figure out the length of it before they start, and then they go start and they follow that outline. So I just learned how to outline. So I was like, okay, guy finds magic discs, puts them in a disc player. Each one gives him powers. I forget now who the bad guy was, but it was probably like his dad or stepbrother. I don't know. But I wrote an outline where every chapter he finds a disc and has a fight. And that gets to the end. And I wrote that whole book, so it was 10 chapters, a couple pages each, and not knowing anything about what I was doing. But I felt so terribly accomplished very early on in life finishing something like that. And I think if I can remember later on in this conversation, I'll try to come back to how like that was an inspiration later on to finish things. Because I just learned early on you could do things with an outline, with knowing when you know where you're going. Creative projects will get there faster. So, same. 10 years old, we both want to be writers. Check. Do you remember on into your teenage years any new aspirations that came about?
Yeah. I specifically remember in like 7th and 8th grade, I wanted to be a lawyer.
Wow.
So I had big goals. I was like, dude, I've figured this out. I know exactly what I'm supposed to be when I grow up. I'm going to be a lawyer. And I remember talking to one of my 8th grade teachers. She was my religion teacher. I went to a Catholic high school. So I talked to her about it, and she's like, do you know what you want to be? And I was like, I want to be a lawyer. And she's like, do you know what kind of law you want to do? And I was like, shoot.
You weren't aware at this point that there were a million different practices?
No. And I was so bummed out by this question because I was like, I thought I had this figured out. I don't know. Now I have to figure out what kind of lawyer I want to be. Like, shoot. And so I kind of got a little discouraged by the situation because she talked to me about it a little bit. She was like, well, I mean, there's criminal defense and you could, try to help people get out of jail, but then you get people that, deserve to be in jail and you have to defend them. So that's a little bit of an ethical situation. And well,
she didn't do a good job talking you in or out of it, really.
Well, no, but she said the thing she ended with that gave me a little hope was like, well, I'm glad that you want to be that. The world needs more good lawyers.
Yeah.
Good people being lawyers, basically is what she's saying. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I should be a good person lawyer. And I was just went off kind of thinking that. And I don't know when that dream dwindled, but it was shortly after.
Interesting. Well, we don't have any parallels there. By the time I was 13, I would say from the age of 12 to almost 15, I didn't have any real huge ambitions. You hit puberty and your mind starts wondering about other things. I would say that at that point in my life, though, I was beginning to be pushed externally towards something religious, preacher, missionary, that kind of thing. And for me, that happened because my whole life was not my friends at school and that kind of thing. Like a lot of kids at that age were, like all my friends at school, they were in, there were cliques and that kind of thing. But every friend I had that was close was at church. So I spent time with friends on Sundays and Wednesdays in the Protestant world of my hometown. And there wasn't a lot of push until 15 towards anything back towards anything creative. So at that age, it was, I just kind of wasn't worried about it. I was probably starting to worry about girls and friends and, the things that teenagers start to worry about. And I just don't remember being quite as creative at that time. I was still reading, and I really started to get into music at that age. But even at that point, I didn't have any real push towards wanting to be a musician, which if you've watched this channel, you've heard a lot of talk about me being a musician. So we're getting to that. But so from the age, I'd say to 10 to 15, I don't think I had an answer to that question or wanted to. I think I started to get scared of it, matter of fact, at that time.
It's a lot of pressure.
Well, it starts to become real. Because you start to realize, like, oh, I am getting older. Oh, I'm starting to look more and more like an adult. Of course, even for me at that time, like at the age of 13, 14, I looked like a 25-year-old, you know? So the world treated me a little bit different, I think, than it might have if I looked like the youthful little kid that I was. So what about you? Was there anything else from 10 to 15 that was any real pull towards doing anything with your life? Or
Yeah, definitely. And while you were talking, I just thought about what dwindled the lawyer aspiration.
Oh, did you figure it out?
I did. My mom said to me, lawyers have to read a lot. And I was like, oh, I hate reading. It's my least favorite thing to do. So I feel like that's probably not going to work for me.
Do you know why you're so bad at reading? No, because I know why I should have been, but am not.
Well, I think I had a lot of negative reinforcement about reading when I was a kid. There was a lot of... It was never a positive experience for me. It was always, you have to read this in order to do X thing and succeed. So it wasn't, hey, you should read for fun. It's, you need to read to work so that you can be successful. And
well, yeah. I know for me and my little brother both, and subsequently now his children, have the same sort of, it's not really, maybe a speech impediment. I don't know, but him and I both at a certain point in our life had to have like extra help in school, and I'm talking first, second grade here, clearly behind, not quite developing that part of our brains quick enough. So we were both pushed. Like I think he actually had to go to a separate room when he was in like second, third grade and have some sort of speech reading therapy type thing, which helped him get more into it. I think just for me, they put me in a more, at the time, they didn't quite have that. I went through second, third grade 4 or 5 years before him, and I think they just put me in a more accelerated reading program. They made me read some more earlier on than the other kids because I wasn't quite getting it. And somewhere around third or fourth grade, it snapped, and I was like, "Holy crap, I love reading!" And then I shot towards the top of the class in reading because I started to overcompensate because I found out I liked it. So we've never had this conversation, but I wonder if like I thought maybe early on maybe you had some sort of impediment and didn't have help with it, but it wasn't that. You just were stubborn and hated it.
Well, yeah, it was just like when I was pre-K, like in preschool and in kindergarten even, like I read all the time. I had little children's books. My mom would tell me we would go to the recreational center in our hometown, the park center, and there was a library there. And we would have swim lessons in the morning, and then she would take us over to the library. She said, "You get to pick out 10 books, no more. Go get 10 books.
That's a lot of books.
Bring them home." And so I'd read every single one of those books.
Wow.
And we would come back the next day. I'd turn them all back in and move on with another 10 books.
So you liked it until it became serious in school.
Yeah, until it became a chore, until it became a punishment.
I think I wanted to dive into that a little further because I think for me, when it comes to what we do now and when we get later on in this conversation today into what we now want to do, I can't help but feel how important my desires and abilities to read really helped me get here and really even now help me see the future with where we're going. So we'll put a bookmark on that, perhaps come a little bit back around to it. But for me at that age, I was just also, even up to 10, 15 years old, I was a reading fool. It was almost like we got a Christmas every other year when the Harry Potter books come out, you know? And that was some of the highlights of my life were like, it was like, you know, I don't know, maybe you have a favorite movie franchise or maybe you like books like I do and you know what I'm talking about. But like, there was nothing more like, oh my God, I can't wait than the release day of that next Harry Potter book. But let's move on a little bit more. Let's say early high school, right? Where it really gets serious. What do you remember being pushed towards, pulled towards, internally feeling pushed towards?
Well, I had something very similar to you. I really wanted to be a musician at that point.
Okay.
I had just started band class, and in that band class, our teacher was also a guitar instructor after school and everything. So I started getting into guitar lessons.
Okay.
And I just absolutely loved the guitar. I loved going to lessons. He was an incredible teacher and somebody that I really felt like I could succeed in this area. He like encouraged me to do more with it. And so I started performing at local bars and everything too, in these little like hometown bands. And he encouraged me to get in front of a mic and sing and actually be a musician. And so that was the beginning portion of me realizing that I really liked the creativity of music and expressing emotion and everything. So I did that for a really long time. And from there started piano lessons. After I could no longer do guitar lessons with him, he had to find a new job in another city, so he had moved away.
Interesting.
And instead of getting a new guitar instructor, I told my dad, I was like, I really would like to learn piano, because if I'm going to go to college for music, I need to learn the piano. And so I started doing that, and with that, I loved the piano, but I didn't feel as connected with it.
Right.
As I did with the guitar. I didn't feel like I could succeed in it as much because I did.
It's a little bit harder too, right? Because you pick up a guitar and you just kind of jam on it and you can jam with people. And not that you can't do that with the piano, but when you try to learn the piano, it demands... I want to get this right. This is hard to explain, but it does, especially if you're thinking about the future and you've got to learn the piano for music's sake, the piano is much more demanding than the guitar.
Yeah.
Unless you somehow just go, I got to learn to play classical guitar, then the guitar just becomes the piano in a different format.
Yeah.
But when you go to learn piano, it becomes a technical endeavor rather than
it's
a creative
academic.
one.
Yeah. And so I didn't connect with the academia portion of it as much as I did with the creative, free-flowing guitar. So
at that point, you were like, okay, maybe I'm not going to do music?
Yeah, I kind of realized that wasn't my passion because, going to college for guitar or for music was going to be a lot more academic and technical, and I would have to sit down and practice and do all these things that like
we're starting to see a pattern here.
Yeah.
You didn't want to work that hard is what it comes down to.
Well, that is kind of the point of my life, isn't it?
Well, not necessarily, because, spoiler alerts, but you did come around to basically sewing and garment construction and spending as much time on that as you would have had to master the piano.
True.
So we'll come back around to that. But so for me at that point, same thing again. It's funny how like every other period of our life is kind of matching up. But I think up until this point, up until high school, I knew I had to figure out something that I wanted to do, and as I mentioned, I was perhaps being pulled externally towards religious stuff, and it wasn't for me. But it pulled pretty hard, because what was happening was like, there was music at church, and even the church that I was a part of at this point was going through its own evolution of, I kid you not, when I was a kid, it's like if it's got a drum beat, it's the devil. Right? And then one day, all of a sudden, our piano in church had this built-in drum track thing. So the music, what do we call her? The music person at our church? The worship leader.
Okay.
The worship leader.
I was like, they call it something different in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I don't even think we called it that, because I think, honestly, early on at this point, referring to a female, as it were, as the worship leader was actually... I apologize, but frowned upon, It was like so I don't know. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. It gets a little weird in this part, but all of a sudden our piano at church had drums, and that for some members, that was like, I don't know about that. You know what I mean? And so I had this huge burning desire for music, and there were members of the church that like would recognize it. Like one time, for no reason, this is where I was at music this early on. I'd kind of gotten into it, and I definitely had an ear for it, but I didn't have the passion yet. But I was listening to the song, and I just went, this is definitely the key of F. Like I could hear it, and I went, oh my God, the harmonica in my pocket is the key of F. At this point in my life, I carry around harmonicas and stuff. I whipped out this harmonica. It was like the final song at church, like we were going to sing a song together and leave. I whip out a harmonica and just go to town with no hesitation.
You got some balls, kid.
Well, it's even worse because some of these things require more explaining than we have time for in this podcast, but I always sit on the front row. I had a bit of attention deficit going on, so I knew I needed to sit up there to pay attention, and I also hate sitting in the back and squinting. It's like with a TV. I kind of sit uncomfortably close to a TV than I think a lot of people would, because I like the immersion. So at church, I sat in the front row. I never missed a chance to sit in the front row. So at this point, that makes it worse, right? Everyone sees it and hears it, and mind you, it sounds pretty good. But I was faking it. Even now, if I can play a harmonica, and if I have the right harmonica for the right song, I can make it sound somewhat like it's supposed to. But I rocked it. And so, of course, there's some people that are like, I don't know about that. And I don't remember the music director getting mad at me or anything, but some people were like, what the heck? And some people were like, that's awesome. But I tell this story because there were certain ways in which some members of the church were like, we need to get this kid, make sure he's playing music here, keep him in the church. And, this kind of sentiment. But, it never really worked out, because there were still too many people in the church at that point that were back 100 years ago in their own heads and didn't want that kind of change. So the church never had a real chance of keeping me in at this point, because what I wanted to do couldn't fit. Like I was the same. Like I could noodle on a piano, but I was never going to get technical enough to learn to play church music and hymnals the way they're supposed to be played. Not even close. Like I can maybe play 2 or 3 hymnals off the top of my head now, and that's it on the piano. So I kind of jumped ahead there, but that's because there were some funny stories. But basically, I had been given a guitar at the age of maybe 10 or 11, and I didn't appreciate it, didn't want it. But at this point, I was like, I want to be a musician. I asked for a guitar, I got it. And that's what really got me into music also at the same time. So at about the same age, you and I both were like, oh, we're going to play music and sing. So that's what got me there. Now, tell us how and where. I mean, you already said like that instructor moved away and you were kind of like, you kind of fell out of music, right? But transition us to the next thing.
Well, okay, so I finished with guitar lessons, and it was getting a little bit closer into my upper years of high school. So I was probably a junior when I started piano lessons.
Okay.
And I did it into when I was a senior. And by the time that I was a senior, I realized that I didn't want to pursue music. So
were you just kind of over it at that point, or did things happen in a way where you're just super over it?
Well, I knew that I wasn't excelling at it. We had a lot of, I'll call them competitions. There's a specific name for them. Again, the academic portion of it, you went and got judged. So you had a couple songs that you needed to play in front of a judge, and then you would
You're
get
talking
scored.
about band.
No, this was for piano.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You guys had this in school?
No, it was this instructor had all of his students do this.
Interesting. So. Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And so you would go to this this competition, and you would play your 3 songs or something. It was one song per competition. So there were 2 songs, and they would score you on 1, 2, or 3. If it's 3, you did perfect.
Right.
And I never got above a 2. And so I was very discouraged because I was like, I'm not getting this. I practiced my heart out. I really liked this song. I thought I did a good job, and I still only got a 2. And all my friends were getting 3s, and they were going to state for piano, and they were like really excelling at it. And of course, my friends had been playing piano since they were 5.
Right.
So
you're like a year in.
Yeah. And so of course I wasn't excelling as well as they were, but I just felt so discouraged by it.
So the comparison to others kind of inside your own head took you out of it. Interesting.
Yeah, and I was like, realistically, these people have been playing since they were 5. I'm going to go to college and be with all these people who've been playing since they were born.
Right.
And how am I supposed to compete with that whenever I've only been doing this for 2 years? I'm not a savant. I don't have any natural ability to just tickle the ivories. I had a good ear for music and what sounded good together, and I liked to write songs on the piano, which is something I didn't really like to do on the guitar. I liked playing things that were already made on the guitar, but I really liked to write on the piano. That was a tangent, not necessary.
No, I mean, it's fine.
So I knew that it wasn't going to be something that I really could pursue being a professional piano player. That seemed a bit outlandish to think anyway. So I was like, well, I don't really want to go into like music education or music business. So I don't really see where I fit in that world. So I decided that really wasn't a realistic goal for me. So I then started to kind of like, my mom and I talked about stuff a lot about what I wanted to be when I grew up, because she was really encouraging on how to get me to find my passion and go pursue that passion. She was very, she really wanted me to do something that I loved, because she was somebody that wished she pursued something when she was in my age, and she didn't. And then she went and did the sensible thing and got like a job locally and stuck there for the rest of her life. So she didn't want that to happen to me. She's like, I want you to go to college for something you love. Let's talk about this. Let's really figure this out. And so from there, I decided I wanted to be an interior designer. So I went to, actually, when I went to go tour the campus that we actually met at, the place that we actually went to school, I went and toured the interior design program there. And I thought it was really cool.
I'm not even sure I was aware they had an interior design program.
They do. They have a very good one. I really liked what I saw there, and I thought maybe I would pursue that. But I wasn't 100% on it. I was trying to really explore my options. So every single time I went to a new campus, I would go for a different purpose. So one was interior design. One was actually for theater. I toured the campus that was just like 30 minutes south of my hometown, and they had a really good theater program there. So I toured the costume shop in there, and I remember the costume designer in there looking at me. We actually, now that I remember it, we were actually touring that place for my sister. So this was 2 years prior. But I happened to like want to go see the theater department because my cousin was actually in the theater department there. And we went into the costume shop, and I remember the costume designer looking at me and go, she's smiling a lot. So I really loved it in there because they had all these big boxes full of materials along the walls, and it was full of these giant tables that were like for the draping tables and the mannequins and everything there. And I just kind of had this I remember feeling a rush of creativity coming at me, which is why I was smiling so much. I was just like, this is a really cool place to create. I like that a lot. But it was something that I really didn't pursue too much anyway. Funny enough, whenever I wrote an essay for my scholarships, like I applied for a couple of different scholarships, and one of them was like, Mom's like, you can't say you're undecided. No one's going to give a scholarship to someone who's undecided. You have to pick something. So I was like, okay. So I picked theater, and I talked about that experience where I was like, I'm going to be a costume designer. And so earlier on, it kind of had that inkling that could be something I could pursue. But it wasn't, I was like, I don't know about being a theater major. Like, what can I realistically do with that? Like,
Right.
But I had a lot of pressure at this point to like figure it out. Like, what do I want to be when I grow up? You need to decide now. You're a senior. You're about to go to college. Like, pick something. Do it now. So I ended up going to school undecided.
You started college undecided.
I did.
Well, okay. So that gets us up to college for you. I need to catch up before we move on. So I left off on basically at the age of 15 into high school, wanting to be a musician. I got my first guitar. I remember very clearly getting my second guitar. My first one was an acoustic, didn't want it, didn't care. My mother gave me, and I don't know how to tell this because it was a weird one, right? My mother, I have to preface this with something that really deserves way more time, but basically my mother moved away from my hometown and back like dozens of times. No exaggeration. So you never knew when she was or wasn't going to be around. And for some reason, she had gotten back to my hometown amongst all these back and forths right around my birthday. And I'm at church. I'm at a church on my birthday. I'm at an overnight church thing. Or maybe not over. Yeah, I think we spent the night at the church for this thing. It's just a thing we did once a year, and it was a big deal. We all liked it and stuff. And for no reason at all, my mom pops up. They're like, what the heck? I didn't expect it. And she brings me a guitar and an amp.
Aw.
And me and my two best friends at the time, Alex and Tara. Tara was my girlfriend. Alex was my best friend. So we were kind of a tight-knit little group right around, causing havoc. And my mom dropped it off. And I think at this exact moment, it was very strange because even at this point, these two very important people in my life hadn't met my mother. And even at that point, she had, like, my mom just came and went like a ghost. And strangely, my best friend's little brother met her. And it was just this kind of weird joke for like even 10 years after. I think they had all met her finally at some point. But even up until almost 10 years after that, because we were still pretty young, like, everyone was like, knew of my mother, but had never met her. And then it was always this joke that my best friend's little brother had. He'd be like, I met her, because he just happened to be outside at that moment when my mom came and dropped it off, the guitar and the amp. And that was funny. That was just kind of a weird thing I always remembered about it. But what was even funnier is me and my two best friends, we had no idea how to play, or I at this point had no idea how a guitar amp worked or anything. But we're sitting inside the church right in front of the altar with this guitar and amp, just looking at it. I remember the three of us just looking at it going, what do we do? And I think we finally braved to plug it in, because there were outlets right at the front of the altar for, fake candles and stuff. I don't know. But we plugged it in. I plugged it up and strummed on it. Didn't know what to do, but we were all just like, yes. Like, all three of us were almost like, oh, yeah, this changes things.
Yeah.
Because, like, none of us had at that point really ever had access to, like, a real guitar. But there were interests inside of all three of us that kind of, like, that piqued our interest. Tara, my girlfriend, was really into music and stuff at the time. I don't know that she ever had any desires to play. That's not what I'm saying. But like, she was kind of super into rock music well before I was, and was just like, yes. And then my buddy Alex is a pretty creative person as well, and so he just thought it was real cool. So I've got a guitar. I don't know what to do with it. And then basically, there's no reason to draw this part of the story out from that exact day all the way up until about the time you're talking about, which is when we met in Murray at our college. Those years in between, so 7 years, 8 years, nothing in the world meant anything to me if it wasn't music related. That's basically, I mean, I could sit here and make this a 4-hour podcast about the stops along the way, but for the sake of this conversation, we'll leave that to future conversations to kind of break down maybe, but nothing, and I mean nothing, mattered. I became focused in a way that I never had. I became determined in a way that I never had, and I was going to be in a band one way or another. And there was a lot of ups and downs, but most of my ups and downs in that regard were determined by the fact that I had, and I'm going to be completely honest with you here, and I'm interested to see how you feel about some of this. I didn't have any naturally given talent. At all. I really didn't. I had piano lessons earlier on that didn't take because I had to be interested to the point of obsession in something to learn any of it at all, right? You know, and I was never really one. It took a long time for me to ever just be able to jam with people because I just wasn't technically capable. I just had to learn things the right way, and it took a long time. It took me a long time to learn songs, and honestly, I don't know that I could ever play a song written by someone else until maybe 22 years old, right? Because that's just not, my brain didn't work at this point in the way that maybe it would have had I had instruction or something, because no one ever taught me anything about the guitar. I just got online and watched videos and read tab music to figure things out, right? And I think a huge part of the rest of the story for me is going to revolve around this exact thing, that I wasn't naturally talented like a lot of people around me were, right? Like, you talk about your friends that were so good at playing piano because they'd been playing for a long time. So I bet you can probably remember which ones were just naturally talented, and it was kind of gross, right? Like
they went on to be music majors in college.
Well, it was like, for me, I have some recollection of some of this still later. I didn't grow up around any other really musical friends. I mean, a couple, but like band friends or something, people that were just in it for the culture of it and the friends of it, and, you know, they weren't going to go on to be tuba players in life, right? Most tuba players don't from high school, but I was not that. I was not the naturally talented one, but I was. Interestingly, I would find out over the years that their natural talent didn't very often match up to my extreme drive. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, but I want to come back to it. Even now, I'm not the best video maker, right? I'm not the most. I'm not even the most articulate on camera. I got a funny sound in my voice. You know, I got a weird hybrid accent. I'm not, you know, the jokes that I think are funny and the words that I get stuck on using, not everyone likes, right? Mm-hmm. But not a lot. There's not many YouTubers out there that ever had the drive to make videos every single day for years on end, right? So there's a lot of ways back then that I started learning lessons revolving around music about what I want to do in life that helped me even now. And here's basically the sum of it. So that I can catch up to where you are. I started playing music at 14 or 15, and all the way up to the age of 21 or 22, I did nothing else. And I got way further. I was in a town full of very talented kids when it came to music and instruments, and I got way further than almost all of them, not because I was more talented, because believe me when I say there were so many of them that I'm still disgusted now aren't doing it for a living because they were so talented. Mm-hmm. I mean, just grossly talented people, but they just weren't driven. And so here I was, didn't sound half as good as they did, but I pushed myself into doing shows and other things. And up until about the point we met, that was my life. Every weekend we drove to a different state or nearby town and played music. And to sum it up, my only intention and aspiration at that point in life was to make it as a musician. That was it. So what I want you to do, talking about the next phase, because you've basically got to catch us up from college to now. I want you to make sure that when you tell us that part of the story, because I want to push this conversation in this direction. What did you actually want to do with it, right? Because you kind of thought maybe you'd do something with music, but even you were saying basically, or at least I gather from listening to you, your only intention up to a certain point in doing something with music was to go to college for it. Did you have aspirations to be a famous musician?
Well, whenever I was playing guitar, I thought I wanted to be a country music musician, which is hilarious if you know me now. I do not like country music at all. But that was like whenever I started guitar, I was like, I'm going to be a rocker, you know, your childhood, teenage dreams. But then, you know, whenever it turned into piano, it turned into, okay, make a career, not just be a musician, you know, so it changed a little bit. But yeah, whenever I went to college, like I said, I was undecided. That was my declared major. I thought maybe I wanted to be a liberal arts major so I could still keep it super open-ended. And, one of my high school teachers, I told him I was going to be a liberal arts major, and she goes, "Oh, so you just want to major in high school?" And I was like, "All right then, thank you for that." And so I kind of got a bad taste in my mouth about that too.
That's funny.
Yeah. So I was very, very lost in this whole career path thing. I just knew I needed to go to college because that's what the plan was. And so whenever I started my first semester, I took a bunch of different classes that were like, that would go to a career, like to a major, I mean. So I took a science class, I took a computer class and all this stuff, but one of them was an elective, and it was a theater class. And so I went to this theater class, and the teacher there reminded me a lot of the high school teacher that I had whenever I first started in high school doing shows. And she was no longer there anymore. And I was really sad that she had left, because she was actually someone that was a very good teacher for our school. But for political reasons, we'll say she decided that she can no longer be at that school. I don't blame her knowing the situation. But that's another story for another day.
I mean, you piqued my interest. Is it?
Well,
can you be a little more specific? If you don't want to be specific, I don't care. But
the structure of a Catholic school is very weird, because you have a priest who has no business taking care of a school.
No actual formal, doesn't often or always have the actual education to be a principal.
Yeah, like a superintendent of a school, like the manager of everything.
Yeah.
So we no longer had the priest that was superintending the school anymore. He had been reassigned, because they do that.
That's what happens.
And we got these new people in, and I guess the new people didn't really like the principal of the high school, and she wasn't doing a very good job. I think she was going through a lot of stuff personally that made her not do a good job, and so it was trickling down to the teachers, and like she was just kind of piling up on them the problems in her life and causing more problems in the school. And so I think no one actually came out and said what was going on, but essentially no one liked the principal. The superintendent of the school wasn't helping, and it got to the point where the teachers were so fed up with it, like one by one they were all leaving. And this was my senior year whenever the theater teacher had left my junior year, so all through my senior year we had a different person doing the theater program, who was not at all, like, they essentially made a different teacher take on the theater department, and she didn't have time for it. And so it was a mess. But my senior year, we graduated, and they have to renew their contracts for the teachers to come back the next year. Half of them didn't want to renew their contract. They all left. So it was crazy. They decided to instead get rid of the principal and they hired somebody else to be the principal. I think all of the teachers that put in their notice, those still left. It was a mess.
Okay, and it doesn't have anything to do with the story, but it just did pique my interest.
Yeah.
I mean, you said politics. I thought it was going to be more like...
No, not like liberal conservative.
Well, no, I thought maybe like she's going to be a Protestant in your Baptist world and just be like, I can't do this or something.
We actually had one Baptist teacher at the Catholic school, which we all thought was kind of funny. It didn't really affect his life at all. He went to the churches with us because we had to have the teachers come to mass with us, but anyway. His daughter went to the school too, so whatever. It didn't matter. But anyway, I went to this theater class, and the teacher there reminded me a lot of the Mrs. Calloway, the teacher that I had in high school. And so I kind of had this sense of home there because I really felt kind of homesick during that first semester because I was very confused about what I wanted to do. And honestly, all those classes that I was taking, I took a lot of credits. And they were all very hard because they were the core classes for your major. They were your science, your math, your just these really strenuous, like I took French, like just a lot of homework. And I was really feeling overwhelmed and overworked. And I was like, I don't know if I'm cut out for college. I don't know if I can do this. And that class kind of gave me a sense of belonging and security. And so I really connected with the theater department. I was like, I think this is it. I think this means that I need to pursue theater because if I like this class enough that I feel like I want to continue to come back to this area, I should continue my college career in this area, in this space, which ended up being a really good thing for me. Because I felt at home at this place, I felt more comfortable to thrive creatively. I felt more confident to be able to do the classes and take on the workloads. And, I decided that I don't necessarily want to be an actor. I don't want to do stage design, that kind of thing. But it kind of encompassed all those things that I really liked when I was a kid. I liked music. I liked interior design. I liked one thing that I didn't bring up yet was clothing. One of the things that I would do whenever I was a kid was doodle dresses, mostly wedding dresses, but I would draw little people and start designing their dresses and everything. So I knew that was something that I had a passion for as well. So doing costume design was kind of a way for me to get into that world of creating clothing that it didn't require me to go to fashion school. So that was kind of what I started telling myself. I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a fashion designer, but I'm doing theater costume design because I don't have access to a fashion design program in the school that we're at because they didn't have one there anymore. But yeah, long story short, doing costume design, I'm a mo.
Don't be distracted.
Doing costume design was what my path forward was. I finished the degree and was really passionate about sewing and constructing garments. And from there, I decided I wanted to go work in the fashion industry. So we moved to LA. And
long story short,
yeah, so we moved to LA for things other than fashion. That wasn't the primary purpose, but it was definitely a good reason for me to
I can fill in the why when I get to my part of the story.
And so I was like, well, I'm going to start looking for jobs in fashion. I'm going to work at, like, of course, my brain was like, I'm going to work for, like, Louis Vuitton and, like, be a designer or whatever. Like, I'm going to be a buyer, or I'm going to be somebody that designs all these beautiful garments for the red carpet. And
I think this is a good, hold your thought. I think this is a good point, a point to switch back to me. Because I think going all the way to now is too far. California is kind of another nice stopping point, because it's really the point before we got into what got us to here now. And honestly, I think this is the point of the conversation, the actual thing that we're getting at. I think that a lot of you are maybe going to want to hear how we got to be YouTubers, thrifters, etc., right? Mm-hmm. Because we haven't talked a lot about anything up till now that got us to where we are, really. I mean, to us it did. but I think it takes a little explaining. So let me catch up to where you are, and then we'll continue from California, because basically at where we are in this story, talking about our creative lives, Hannah and I have met at school at Murray University, which is 2.5 hours west of my hometown and about an hour and a half, 2 hours east of yours.
Yeah.
Or southeast of yours.
Yeah.
Same part of the country, though. I mean, pretty close. Outside of St. Louis, a couple hours outside of Louisville. So small towns outside of major towns and states. But we meet at school, and I bounced around musically for a few years and finally came to a point where I was like, okay, I don't think at this point I'm going to become a famous musician. And I did something similar to what you did. I was like, well, do I continue to do something like what I'm doing and then find a place to work inside of the music world? Because at this point I knew I could, because basically I did as many shows as I could. I never really made any real money playing music. And then what transitioned me finally to the path that I think will start to show you how I got here. And I want you to think about this, Hannah, because this is what I want out of the rest of your story. I mean, tell whatever you want, but try to squeeze in a little bit about how it really pushed you into what we're doing now. Because here it is for me. I was like, all right, I got to go get a different job. I was working the same job from like sophomore year of high school until a year or two after high school. And this is where I am now in the story. I'm like, all right, I'm tired of this job. I'm tired of not doing something more musically. But I wasn't looking hard enough. I wasn't looking hard for a different job. But what I did do one day is I went and paid like $100 an hour to record in a recording studio nearby. And this was still at the point where like I wasn't really in bands at this point. I was trying to be. Actually at this point I'd been in a metal band playing the bass. But that's not what I wanted, right? I wanted to play guitar and sing, but I wasn't good enough. So this is the point where I really started trying. I was writing songs. I finally had this song written that I think I called Breathe or something. I don't know. And I'd recorded it on crappy microphones in my bedroom. And I go to pay at this recording studio, and I'm in there, and I'm recording this song, and the guy that's recording me is being really nice, but I can tell, like, you know, he's not impressed. It wasn't that he wasn't impressed because he was in any way showing it. I just kind of realized at this point I wasn't that good, because there's a huge difference between just playing your guitar and shouting at your microphone and then going into a studio with high-quality microphones, high-quality headphones, and playing while someone's hitting a record button. It's way different than I think you could ever imagine. Case in point, spoiler alerts, I get a job at this place because the guy says to me, hey, you seem to know a little bit more about this than a lot of people come in. I like you. And this was after like 2 or 3 recording sessions. He's like, do you know anything about video? And I was like, yeah, a little bit. You know, little in high school, my brother made a lot of movies growing up on VHS and stuff. Yeah, you know, I didn't know anything, especially regarding what was coming next, because it turns out this place was not just a recording studio. It was a storefront with musical gear, and then the back half was a recording studio. The other half was, maybe it was thirds, front third store, 1/3 recording studio, 1/3 video production house. So he brings his boss in after my recording studio session and is like, he knows video. Maybe you could give him an interview or stuff. She's like, okay, well, listen, do you know anything about Final Cut? And I was like, yeah, I've heard of it. I've never heard of it. Come back here Monday, and I have a test that you can take on Final Cut. And if you pass it, we'll hire you as one of our editors. So I go home and spend the whole rest of the week watching every video I can about Final Cut. Just crazy amounts of like attention given to it. I come back on Monday, I pass the test, I get a job as a video editor. So I think you're starting to see how this story takes hold to where we are now, because so much of what we do for a living now is based around making video. And I didn't want to be a video person at this point, but you know what I wanted? Can you make a guess?
I wanted a musician.
I wanted to be near that music studio, that recording studio, because we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. I think they used to brag that it was like $1 million recording studio, and it probably was at that point. So I got the job, and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit more here again because the details don't matter so much. But it wasn't too many months later, I was basically running the place, like softly. It was never an official thing. Like I was hired as manager, but it was just me and the guy that hired me. We were the only ones there. I was doing the video and a large portion of the audio. He was doing the audio in the store, and that was that. And so this turned me towards a point where like I started doing even more music, because then I had access to bring my band into a studio, or sometimes we could very easily rent gear from the place and put on our own shows. And I was getting discounts to buy better equipment. That was a huge perk. And so, but to tie this back into an earlier part of the story, I learned another huge lesson here. I had been in bands up to that point where it was someone else's band and I was just playing bass, or I was doing this and that. I was filling in here and there. But this was the point where I was like, I know what to do. And I bought basically a whole band's worth of equipment. I had multiple guitar amps, multiple drum sets, multiple bass sets. I had all of it. And then at that point, all I had to do was we had a yearly festival in our hometown, and there were always places where younger kids like myself, 18 to 20, could play their punk music or whatever. And I would basically do shows like that, but I would show up with all the gear, set it up, and just hope that enough of my friends showed up to play it, or people that I knew musically that owed me favors or whatever. So I began this long period of a couple years of playing these shows where it was different people every time. So my music was always different. So some of the same scene kids that would show up would always hear something different and always be kind of interested, because no one knew what we were going to do. And interestingly, you guys that have watched our channel have seen the rubber ducks around this place. And I've told this story on the channel before, but it's important to include here. I always had this giant rubber duck on top of my guitar amps when we did this. So you'll see a lot of footage, if you know how to come across it, on YouTube of me playing music back in these days. There's always a giant rubber duck just sitting there. But it came to a point where I finally was just like, okay, I'm not going to do this for a living. I'm not tone deaf, but I don't sing super well. The only thing I had going for me at this point, I think, was I was kind of unbridled by that technical aspect you were talking about with piano, or to where I wrote songs that were really weird. And I don't want to compare myself to any musicians, because I was not as good as anyone I could make this comparison to. But there are these musicians through time who have been really popular for making songs that just don't make sense structurally. And I had some of that going on. So we'd play these shows where songs would get weird, and we'd have these interesting moments because just no one expected to hear that. You know what I mean? And that was it. Otherwise, I didn't have a whole lot of talent. But what I did learn at this point, that's going to really transition me well into the next portion of the story, is I learned that I could be the driving force behind things. Do you know what I mean? These kids that would show up and play my music with me were musical geniuses. And there's a couple that, God, I have so much to say about them. I should just make a podcast about these individuals, or fingers crossed one of these days come across where they are and make a podcast with them just to talk about it. But a couple people that played music with me at this point were just so good. I mean, just so good at what they do. And a couple of them went on to do better things. A couple of them went on to do some tours with famous country musicians and some other things like this. Most of them didn't. Most of them are still in my hometown working at the factories, with more musical talent in their pinky than I ever had in my whole body, just working at a factory. And I don't mean to be disparaging in saying this. Those people did what they had to do, and there's no shame there. But what I learned at this point was, like, if I worked harder, I could do better than most of them. But the kind of work harder I think is different than a lot of people are going to understand. Because, like I said, sometimes it was just money, being willing to spend the money. I bought the gear. It was like, it was like the Field of Dreams. You buy the gear, the musicians will come. You build the field, the players will come. That's the transition for me into where we met, which is at school. Was that I was like, okay, I now know that I'm not going to be a rock star. I might end up being a genius studio tech if I keep going the way I am, because that was something else I had. I had a very acute ability in a recording studio to understand microphones, their pickup patterns, their voltages, just these things, and their placement, more importantly. Matter of fact, even now, if I move around this microphone, I am just... I have an awareness that I don't think most of you are going to understand unless you're into microphones, about the pickup patterns of a microphone and where I'm standing. Because we're plugged in here. Do you know what I mean? So I have this awareness of sound and audio that made me very acutely good, not at recording in general, but at studio teching, as being the one who plugs up mics and sets things up and does clever things in a recording studio. I thought at this point, that's my gig. I thought maybe I could just go on to be good at that. But I was like, I'm not going to do it here in my small town. I'm going to go to school, but I'm going to go to school for something just kind of cool and fun. And I'm going to meet some people. And I really only planned on going to college for maybe a year. And I said maybe even 2. And a lot of people in my life at this point are like, that's not really smart. You know, you need to get an education. You need to do all these things. And I was pretty stubborn at this point. I was like, no, I just got into camera stuff, and I'm realizing I'm really good at it, or I really like it at least. That's the thing. And here's the recurring thing for me. It wasn't that I was good at it. It was just that I tried really freaking hard, right? So I was like, I have all this music gear, and I'm starting to sell it for video gear because I feel myself being drawn towards it. So I'm going to go to school. I'm going to find some people that are into music and movies or whatever I'm into and try to do some more stuff there, because there's nothing else in this town at this point for me to do, because all my other music friends at this point were starting to move on to adulthood. So I went to school and met you at the age of 22. I think I was like 22 at the time. You were 20. And we hung out at school, and there's not a lot to talk about at school other than I fully transitioned into video. I left all musical aspirations behind, and the only really hold over my life at that point that music had was my leftover audio gear. I still have really expensive, nice audio gear left over from that time because it still works well, and it was expensive back then, and it's still pretty useful now. I'm talking, I still have football fields of mic cables, you know, because I'll just never get rid of them, because you wouldn't believe how much footage of mic cables run around this podcast room right now. A ton, right? 20 cables. So I'm in school, and there's not a lot to talk about here other than just like I die hard into movies. And so let me get you to the next point of the story, Hannah, because we moved to LA together because I was at this point in college. I was on that second year, and I was already like, yeah, this is what I thought. I'm not here for a degree. I'm here to learn what I want to do. And I figured out it was movies. I'd made a lot of movie making friends, and I was basically failing out of my last semester at our school because I was leaving every other day to drive to Nashville to film this project I was hired for. And it was about the time you were graduating, because you were a couple years ahead of me, despite being a couple years younger, because I went to school really late. Everyone went at 18. I went at like 22. And basically, through all of this happening, a long series of events that honestly, once again, probably deserves its own podcast. I'm failing out of school because I'm being hired to shoot movies, which was crazy. It was exactly what I wanted to happen. And Hannah graduates, and we go home. How long were we home? A week?
Well, I graduated on 12, 13, 14.
Okay.
And we left the 30th.
We left for LA in time to make it to LA on New Year's Day.
Right.
Which is crazy. But
and we went to my house for Christmas, so I guess we didn't technically stay there the entire time.
Well, I remember we went to your house for like Christmas Day. We were at my house a couple days after. Mm-hmm. I got a call saying, hey, this person will hire you to shoot this movie in LA. Move out here. You can stay in my apartment while it's on, and then you can figure out what to do after. And I sold, what did we sell? We sold my van at the time. There's some pictures on like my Instagram, I think, of this van. You should go back and check it out at Tendo's Trash. It was orange with ghost white flames and banging rims on it. It was awesome. But I sold it for like $300.
Yeah.
I sold my TARDIS. I had built a life-size TARDIS. It was my first woodworking project ever, so it wasn't great, but it was passable for a Doctor Who TARDIS. Or if you don't know what that is, well, I don't know how to explain it, because British people, you're not going to be British and not know what it is, because it's a police telephone box. But it was a huge 11-foot tall wooden structure I'd built. Someone paid me $200 for it. I put it on like Facebook Marketplace, and I think that's all the money we moved to LA with.
Yeah.
I don't think we had another dime.
Well, I think I know we left with $1,000.
Okay,
so I don't know how.
Maybe we had some money.
Yeah.
And you know what? This is an interesting part of the story. We went there because someone hired me to make a movie, and Hannah was like, all right, let's do it. We didn't have any other plan. And we're not going to get into the whole movie thing other than to say I got there and the whole project fell apart. But we were already in LA, and I got some video jobs, and she got a job at a dress shop. So why don't you take it from there?
Well, yeah, we got to LA and I scrambled to find the first job I could because obviously we needed money to be able to live there. And I knew with my garment construction background, I could work at a retail shop at least. So I applied to a couple different stores, and I had previously worked at a bridal salon in your hometown in Owensboro for one summer between semesters. And so I was like, well, I'll apply to a bunch of bridal shops again because I can do that. I have experience. So the first place I applied hired me basically on the spot. And I ended up I was actually just talking to my sister about this. This was the second worst place I ever worked in my entire life.
Wow.
Save from Postmates. I worked Postmates for a while. That was literally the worst job I ever had in my life. But that was when Postmates was brand new too. Yeah, and Postmates is fine.
Honestly, at this point, Uber was all of that was brand new. The world had never heard of such before this.
Yeah, Postmates was fine, but not in LA. Like, there's nowhere to park. So if you've ever done Postmates, you understand how crucial parking is.
Well, let me interrupt you a little bit because I want to keep this conversation on track. What did you want to do at this point? Did you know when we got to LA? And I can't stress enough, when we're in LA, like, we have no idea what we're doing. I'm barely good enough to turn my camera on, much less shoot a movie, but it's what I wanted to do.
Right.
That's at this point, I wanted to be a movie maker. Nothing, and quite similarly to my music career, nothing else mattered. And I know it was a little different for you, and I want you to express how.
Yeah. Well, I was tortured a lot by this idea. Like, what do I want to make my career out of? What do I want to pursue? I knew I wanted to do something in fashion. At this point, didn't really want to pick up a sewing machine again because I was very burnt out on it because I had during college worked at the costume shop.
That was all you did.
Sewing was literally my whole job, and so I was really tired of doing it. So I didn't want to go into garment construction. I wanted to do something more in the creative aspect of like design or, but I knew realistically with my just being out of college experience, I was not going to be a designer like that.
Right, and we're gonna quit telling the stretches of the story at this point and just do some quick back and forth to catch us up to here, because at this point we're both pretty sure what we want to do. Like, Hannah's like, well, I'm gonna do fashion. I know I want to design clothes. I'm kind of over actually making them, and I'm like, well, I want to make movies, but like it's a huge industry to crack. So we were doing some interesting things at this time, right? I would write a movie, and Hannah would draw all the costumes, right? And so this was our first time ever, like, working together creatively, like trying to make our different skill sets fit. So, I made this whole Western movie once that Hannah made all the Western costumes for, and there were some pretty serious costumes in this project. Just search my name, Dallas Blanton, on YouTube, and it should come up, and you'll see some movies. And pretty much Hannah did the costume for most of the movies that are on my channel that has my movies on it.
Well,
so
the one before that too, the Middle Ground.
Oh, yeah.
Very first one we did, we all sat in your best friend's apartment in Kentucky.
Yep.
The four lead actors sewing pants and vests.
And that was right before we moved to California. Yeah, I mean, like the summer before we moved to California.
Yeah.
It was a funny sight. I wish I had some pictures of it. I don't think that I do, but we sat in my best friend's living room, me and the other people in this film, with these patterns out, and we were like cutting them out, and Hannah was sewing them. It was odd.
Yeah.
It was an interesting way to delve into filmmaking. But continue.
Yeah, so we did a lot of homemade costume construction at our apartment, did a lot of creative things that way. But as far as like my job life, I think I started to like get into wanting to be a wedding dress designer. And
I just have to show this while we're going. Here is a full-on red suit and vest. All of this Hannah made. As far as this joke of "Is that your daddy?" that's just I don't think the video is going to actually be in here, but I don't even want to tell the story, but we were filming this film where Hannah made all the costumes, and I just scrolled back to see if I could find the costumes. It's probably going to be the only one I find. Here's a couple more stuff that Hannah made. You made these cool vests and these. I think we also borrowed some, like the shirts borrowed from a costume shop, but you made these pants, which I subsequently ripped every other day of filming. But I wanted to make sure you guys understood, like, we were all in. We were 23 and 21, and we were like, not that you, this is what I wanted to get at. It's not necessarily that you wanted to make movies, but you knew that you could draw clothing and it could work out. You knew that you could conceptualize a garment and then make it, right? Actually, I found the thing. Let's watch it real quick since we're here. I don't know if this is gonna work.
Oh, it's just that bit.
It's the wrong bit. Right before that, I go, "Is that your daddy?" This kid that was helping us film, his dad was supposed to stop by. He's like, "My dad's coming by on his motorcycle or something. I want you to see the motorcycle." So every time a motorcycle would go by, I'd go, "Is that your daddy?"
You look like a greasy old man.
It's so dumb. And you know what's so funny, too? Because I don't look old at all in this. I'm supposed to be an old man. We didn't use this take at all. We actually ended up redoing it later and doing it way better, like shaving my head and all kinds of other stuff. So, yeah. Continue your story, though. You're in LA. I want to know what you wanted to do. Hold on. I found it. We have to watch it. Come on now. Is that your daddy? I don't remember how it happened, but someone ended up getting that clip from the edit and sending it around to like everybody.
It was very
funny. And for a long time, I'd be driving around town and people would be like, "Is that your daddy?
Is that your daddy?"
Anyways, I'm trying to get you to tell the story like 6 times.
Well, I wanted to be a wedding dress designer, and then
So I want to know, though, is that like you were like, all right, that's my path? I want to know how serious you were about some of these things and how serious you weren't. Because there's certain parts of our story where we were just bumbling around.
Yeah.
But there's certain points also where we were like, yes, this is it.
It really wasn't. That was kind of, I feel like the portion in the beginning of us being in LA, like honestly all of LA, like I was very aimless. I was like, well, maybe I want to pursue makeup design because, I wanted to do that in college. I did theater, makeup, all that, monster creation kind of stuff too. So I was like, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll, go into the movie thing and try to work in costume construction or something in the movie industry. There was just so many options, but I didn't like any of them. But, I worked at this bridal shop that I hated. I quit there very quickly because I hated it and got a job at the place that I ended up working at to move here as well, and really loved working there. Like I felt very at home there. I felt happy. It was probably one of the best jobs I ever had. And all the while I was doing little internships. I worked at a fashion PR company for a little bit. I worked for
I forget about that sometimes.
I worked for a small jewelry designer for a little bit, just trying to like find my place in the world, gain experience so I could kind of like get into one of these big fashion houses.
Would you say at this point you were really unsure of what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I really was. Because I knew I liked fashion. Like I liked clothes, I liked creating them. And I didn't know how to use that skill in a way that was realistic, because you're going to be a fashion designer. You think you're going to work for Coco Chanel. No one gets to work for Coco Chanel straight out of college.
Right.
That's not realistic.
Not how it works.
No. And so I was like, well, I don't know what to do until I can be good enough to do that. So I didn't know where to go. Ended up being at this bridal shop for a while, and then ended up going, well, maybe instead of designing the wedding dresses, I'll open my own wedding dress shop. And so I pursued the path of taking on a management position at this bridal shop here in Phoenix. Long story short, I guess, I kind of during that time, we had done a lot of thrifting. It was just kind of our pastime because we didn't really have a ton of money. We didn't have a ton of things to do.
We didn't ever thrift together seriously, I think, until LA.
Right. That's true.
I mean, we had been to the thrift stores in our college town, but like, it's really interesting to think about what we do with our lives now. And this is the point of this podcast. It's just this weird journey into it. We definitely had lots of experience prior, or varying degrees of experience thrifting and yard selling, etc. prior to this. But like, even at this point, until we moved to LA, we never like hit the thrift stores hard. But I would say when we lived in LA, it was at least every other day occurrence.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, let me kind of catch up to where you are too, and we'll keep moving. We're not moving very fast. This has turned a little bit more into storytelling than I think I intended to, but it's fine because, again, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, my intention here is to explain how we came about what we're doing now. And I wish it were as simple as we just thrifted our whole lives and we thrift now. It's not. We had such wildly different intentions, and I think you'll see when we get to the end of this conversation, which is still a little bit of the ways off. So I hope if you're still watching, comment below, still watching, because this is going to be a longer podcast, which I'm not mad about. I'd always intended for these podcasts to be closer to 2 hours rather than 1 hour, but we don't often have time to do that. But I think this is an important one and a conversation I really like having. So this one's going to stretch out a little bit, but I want to really get to like how we got into thrifting, and I think there's a lot more to the story here. We're in LA, right? And Hannah's like, I want to do design, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know how. And like you said, you worked for several different people in several different capacities while in LA, and pretty much we're just like, yep, nope, this isn't it.
Yeah, none of it fit.
And this was one real time where like our paths were kind of diverging at one point, but then weren't. We were really bouncing around. And what I want to show you here, just I didn't intend to do this either, but I think it's so funny. I think this will really show you, give you a real glimpse into our lives at this point, because I keep every picture I've ever taken, and that's what this is, my Google Photos. This is literally my phone roll, okay? What you're seeing here as I scroll up is back in, what's the date here? This is Friday, May 4th, 2004, the summer before we moved to LA. And you can see every single photo I'd taken. Here's even the memes that I'd kept in my phone. Some of this isn't really going to get an explanation, but okay, here's my parents' wedding night. None of this really matters, but you can just see, like, here's me taking photos of my gear while I'm doing hired projects. I got hired to film this documentary about immigrant workers that worked in the cornfields nearby, right? Here's some construction going on. Some of this is important, some of it's not, but I'll point out some of the stuff that's just funny. Here's some of my musician friends on covers of magazines. And here's a funny one. Here's the blueprint for the TARDIS that I was talking about. And here's how serious I was. There's my father. Here's how serious I was about building it. I had at this point stored tons of photos on my phones of just the TARDIS. And finally I built one. I built this the same summer we made that movie. And then I sold it the next summer before we left. But I built the TARDIS in my little brother's driveway. Here it is framing up. And I keep scrolling up and you'll just kind of see it just keeps coming together. There's me standing in it. And here's us doing a radio interview for the movie we made. Here's my horse a couple years before he died. More pictures of the TARDIS. None of these are mine, except, you know, here's what it's going to look like. Here's me building it. I think this ended up being an Instagram post. Another interview we did in a local town, just advertising the movie. Another interview. And then I think actually here's where we started shooting it. This is the first week we were shooting it. We actually went to Civil War reenactments to shoot parts of the film. And again, like, I think this is also important because, like, you may not know this, but at the time that we're doing this, we're going to thrift stores to buy garments to modify into parts of the costume. So here we are on a Civil War battlefield, right? Shooting people acting like they're killing each other. And we're all like, oh my God, this is filmmaking, right? That's what's happening here. There's a Lincoln impersonator. And for the first time in my life, I finally went, I know what I'm doing. This is what we're doing. We're going to, for the rest of our lives, I think to myself, we're going to, as cheaply as possible, just keep making movies until we can make something out of it. That's where I was at this point. Because, like, I'd always thrifted. I'd always learned how to do things cheap. And the most expensive thing about this whole project was the camera. I had at this point purchased a $2,500 camera, and that was crazy money to me. But it was like the first of a long line of cameras to come that were highly cinematic. It was a camera made by a company called Blackmagic. It was their first cinema camera. They've released a dozen cameras since, and I think they just announced one that it shoots 12K footage, and you can buy it for $6,000, which is crazy. But they had to do that to compete because other camera, Red now makes a $6,000 camera, which we're not here to talk about cameras, but just believe me when I tell you that's crazy. So, all the while we're doing all this stuff cheap. We're in Kentucky, so we have infinite access to places that look like this, right? Just these, here's the creek. Tell me that doesn't look good on film. And it's so funny how this worked out because here's Hannah painting the TARDIS. These seem like the story doesn't go together, but we were literally shooting one day, and the next is like, all right, I'm gonna go work on the TARDIS. Here it is coming together. And I don't think there's the side of my orange van I was telling you about. That's my little brother, who's quite a bit taller than I am, standing inside of the TARDIS. But there's that beautiful orange van I drove. And like, this is a fun part of the story because it was a year later, and I sold these things, and we'd never been able to make it to LA. Mm-hmm. And here it is coming together, just about done there. That's crazy. It makes me want to build another one. The day we have space to do that, I'll definitely make another one. And here's a costume Hannah put together, quite fancy, for the film we were working on. And I don't know if there's any more that's worth showing. Some of these memes are hilarious. I can't even imagine what some of them are. But basically, I want to make it known that at this point in the story, like, I know exactly what I'm doing. All that matters in life whatsoever is making movies. Period, the end, no matter what. So, Hannah, as briefly as you can, get from LA to now, and tell us along the way what your dreams were or weren't, and be honest about it. If you didn't have any, tell us. If you did, tell us.
Well, I mean, I feel like my mid-20s of work, this giant question mark of like, what do I want to do? I felt very aimless, trying to like work my way into a corporate situation where I could be a, blue collar American or whatever. White collar American, I guess, would be what it is.
Right.
And so I really didn't understand what to do. But we were doing a lot of thrifting, and I remember saying to you something about how, like, well, I wish I could buy more clothes. Like, I want to be able to go to the mall and go buy clothes. Like, that's you look great, hun.
That's old man me anyways.
And you said to me, like, why do you need to go to the mall? Why can't you just thrift them? And I was just like, well, I guess you're right. And
right.
So,
well, it was a really funny time in our lives because it's important to understand how broke we were too.
Yeah.
Because that was a huge part of it. And of course, it was always going to be. We could just afford to pay rent and to eat. Even sometimes at this point in our lives, it was hard to do that.
Yeah.
And this was becoming a more important thing because I was going down this road where I was like, nothing else matters. I'm going to be a filmmaker. And you were like, I don't feel that strongly about anything I'm doing right now. Except for I know I want to do something with clothing. That's right. That's all you had.
Yeah.
And this is important, right? Because like knowing that's just two different steps on the same path, right? Knowing what to do and I'm doing it. Any chance I had to make a movie, I could. I'm not going to do this, but I could continue to scroll up this page. Like matter of fact, I'm looking at it myself and I'm seeing the very next film I worked on, and this one was for hire. Someone hired me to shoot this, and that was the path I was on it. And Hannah was like, well, Hannah was right behind me. She's like, I know what I want to do, but I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, and I felt very almost discouraged a little bit because I was in this world of, the fashion world is very vain. You look at, you've got the most expensive clothes, you've got the most expensive accessories. It's all about show of money, and we didn't have it.
Right. And
I was like, I don't know how to be in this world and not have any money to like partake in it. And so
this is a really important point too, because this was still early enough on in our relationship that like maybe we weren't so good at communication as we are now. And we had some difficult conversations at this point because I was feeling very driven, and you were feeling very hopeful, but you hadn't reached that point of like, oh, okay, I know what to do. And so the point you brought up where I was like, she was being nice about how the conversation went. I was a little bit more blunt than she's retelling it. I didn't understand, because basically we're up to the point now where we're living here in Phoenix, but it was well prior to this channel, right? We started this channel 2 years ago. We've been here for about 5, and I was making movies. I'd fallen into some other work that's irrelevant to the story, really. I'd begun doing professional video work where I was hired to do video. I mean, it was my life at that point, but the work didn't matter because I wanted to make movies. That was all that mattered. And I wanted Hannah to find something like this. And honestly, at this point, I was like, well, honestly, at this point, Hannah, like, if you can't figure it out, just keep making the stuff for my movies. If nothing else, like, do that until that opens another door for you. But the conversation where thrifting came up and and honestly, what changed our lives is Hannah says, okay, I'm here. I want to do clothing. I want to do fashion. Movies, fine. But like movies, maybe I can design wedding dresses. I want to design stuff. And it's like, but I don't have the money to buy the stuff that I want.
Yeah. And even buying material for a wedding dress to like start up samples for it, like, just seemed out of the question. Right.
Or anything of this nature, buying anything. And at this point, I was pretty rude to you. I was like, screw you. We go to the bins together at this point every other day. Right? Because that's what we did in our spare time. And at this point, we weren't doing it for a living. We were doing it because like we realized we loved it. It was finding a Goodwill bins was a huge chapter in our lives. The first time we went, we were like, this, we don't know how yet, but this changes things.
Right.
We knew it would, which was really strange because if we knew what we knew now then, we wouldn't have been as broke as we were. But I said, Hannah, like I was real rough with you. I was like, you don't have an excuse anymore. If you want to make clothing, you don't need to buy fancy materials. We were at the bins at one point. I was like, look at this. I was like, Hannah, look at all this stuff. What you're saying you want to do, it's all right here. And it's funny because we had that conversation, let's just, for the sake of the story, say in January. I'm just doing this for a frame of reference. I don't know actually what time of the year it was. And then, to be honest with you, I don't think we had much it was probably more of an argument than a conversation, and I think we just didn't talk about it for a good little while. But to your credit, you kind of took that understanding of what the Goodwill bins was and ran with it. And she looks at me one day and she says, there's these kids at the Goodwill bins I've had a conversation with that are reselling some clothing they buy here on Depop. I'm going to try it.
Yeah.
It was as simple as that. You thought about it for some time. You gathered information from others, and you're like, I'm going to sell some clothes.
Yeah.
So take it from there, because that's how we for the first time got into any manner of reselling or thrifting for a living.
Yeah, it really just kind of happened quickly, but it happened exactly like you said. Like, I was working at the bridal shop. We were going to the bins all the time just for fun. It was like our thing we like to do. And I had a conversation with one of those guys. Like, I was very aware that those guys sold the clothing that they were buying. Like, that was obvious.
When you end up in a Goodwill bins, it becomes very evident that most people there are resellers for sure.
Yeah, and I had no idea how to sell clothing. I was like, I knew how to sell it at a store, but I didn't know how to sell it online.
Let's be honest too, just for the sake of the audience, because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. At this point, what was even your fashion sense? I think you had a better idea of fashion sense than application, which is not to say you were or weren't stylish, but neither of us were.
I mean, I feel the same way about it right now. Like, I wear t-shirts and jeans all the time. Like, I know what looks good, but I don't put it on my body.
Right. Well, I don't know. You say that, and that I understand that to be true, because we both very much so feel the same way. I mean, you guys know how I dress, but you spend a lot of time on our videos dressed up in a rather fashion. I want to say fashionable way, but I mean like up-to-date fashionable way.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so you say that, and I know what you mean, but I think people watching are going to go, what the heck are you talking about, Hannah? You dress awesome. I mean,
well, thank you.
Well, often you do. Yeah, I mean, you get compliments and comments on your outfits on our channel daily.
Well, it's this time that we're talking to, where we were just going to the bins. Like, I the only kind of fashion I had was going to work at the bridal shop. So I had to wear dresses and just look nice all the time. And I was more of a bohemian kind of dresser. It's what I really liked to wear. But finding that kind of stuff at the bins wasn't really something that was easy to do.
Well, it wasn't something that we had the experience yet to know could be done.
Right.
Because at this point, it's like, hey, what do you need? I'll go find it at the bins this week. But we know how to dig for it. We know how to look for it. We didn't back then.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of calls back to that idea that I had a long time ago with the piano. Like, I was very much restricted by the normalcy of like what it's supposed to be. Like with piano, I was restricted to think that, oh, if I'm going to be a pianist, I need to be an academic in it. And I like started to get this very narrow vision on it. Same with like the clothing. Going to the bins, I was like, well, I need to find things that I could find at the mall. Like I need to find, Abercrombie and Fitch. I need to find, I can't think of literally any brands of clothing right now, but like I had this vision of mall dress. I didn't ever consider dressing to express in a way that was like creative. So I was in a box of box stores. And so whenever I started to like resell clothing, I was like, well, I need to resell vintage because that's what sells. And so it got me into this thinking of what's old. Okay, if it's old, is it something that I would wear today? Like, and so it opened up my creativity in the fashion world. So now I feel like you were so distracting.
Don't look at my computer.
It opened up my creativity into what I can wear, what I could sell, and how I like to dress, and how, so like I do know what's happening in the fashion world. If I go into a Forever 21 right now, I'd be like, yeah, I know why that's there. I see that trend. I know what's going on. But I don't even like worry about what's happening in the mall stores anymore, which is a huge jump from where I was.
Right.
So something that I was thinking about while we were having this conversation, that like in the back of my mind, I always knew that I wanted to do clothing reconstruction in some way. It was something that I thought, well, maybe I can take wedding dresses and I could recreate them to be sellable, like refashion them to make them more trendy. There was a blog that my sister had found whenever I was in college called New Dress a Day. And it was this girl that was writing a blog about going to the thrift store, buying a garment for $1 and recreating it, like reconstructing it to make it a modern piece. So she would take a muumuu and turn it into like a A-line dress, or she would take a skirt and turn it into a cute top, and etc. So I thought that was a really cool concept. And I was like, I'm not going to have the dedication or the forefront to do the work and write a blog post about it. Like that seems unrealistic for me. But, that thought was in the back of my mind whenever I was going to the bins and reselling clothing. I was like, I could take these less than desirable pieces of vintage clothing and turn them into something that's a little bit more creative and something that somebody would wear in 2020 rather than something that they should never have worn in 1980. And that's where kind of my idea of reconstruction started to really blossom. For the most part, the things that I was reselling on Depop was just, I found a top, I'm selling that top for X number of dollars. So I didn't really do a ton of reconstruction. But doing the Depop thing, I realized how much I liked it, how much I really kind of felt successful in it, and felt like it was something that I was kind of good at. I don't know why that's hard for me to say.
Well, I mean, probably because we're getting really close to recent now, because we're not that far into this reselling YouTube journey. I mean, I think I started taking YouTube way more serious before we took reselling serious.
Yeah.
So your struggle with admitting some of these things is probably that like they're too real right now.
Yeah.
Like everything we've talked about thus far is really just fantasy land from 10 years ago, as sometimes the past can be. But this stuff's not, like, because we're, basically Hannah's got you up to the point where like we've started reselling things, and there's not a lot for me to add to that other than like I was doing video stuff for hire, but I was still working for other people, and it was my first real job that was out there in the world with people my age. I mean, all my jobs back home were a lot more secluded and away from people. I mean, I was locked in a back room in a recording studio, and that was the most I ever did with strangers. But most of the part of the story she's telling, I'm out on the road filming stuff. Long story short, it wasn't for me. I was like, all I want to do is go make movies. As a matter of fact, at that time, I was taking every bit of my pay and going and shooting a film. And I was distracting Hannah out here on my computer because, like, I'm just so blown away on how I can just scroll through all my photos. And it's just like everything's framed by a film for me. If you talk about a period of time, I'll be like, that's when I was working on this project. And that's all that mattered, which I think will be funny to some people watching because they're hearing us talk about all this. And I think they just imagine us to have always probably been in this state that we are of, I mean, look at this awesome collection around us. Of course, we've had this for 20 years. There's nothing on these shelves surrounding us that we've had longer than 3 years. I mean, a year and a half, a little less than 2. I mean, I think we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary of YouTube. Actually, you know what?
What?
Is it August? No, we just passed it.
Oh, wow.
We started YouTube on like August 8th. I never even thought about it. 8th or 12th or something like that. We're done. 2 years of YouTube. Pat us on the back, I guess.
Well done.
That's crazy. I didn't think about that. I just blew my own mind. So yeah. We're 2 years into YouTube, and the first 6 months of the YouTube had nothing to do with reselling. After about the first year, Hannah quit her job, and we've taken reselling way more serious. But like, it's based. So here we are at current, basically, and I want to have one more section of this conversation before we quit, which is, I want to talk about what we actually want to do now and what our biggest aspirations are. But before we really do that, like, I just want to make sure everyone understands. It's so to me, it's funny looking back on how we get here. I don't know how well we just did drawing the lines, because for me, I can see a very zigzaggy path, but I know what the path is. Of course, when I grew up, we went to a lot of yard sales and thrifted a lot. And of course, that has bearing on what we do now. But the real bearing that it has isn't that we had a love for it. It's just that we knew some of these things were possible. And even furthermore, to lengthen your story, to add to your story a little bit, you started selling on Depop, and you were still working full time. And when I was like, I'm going to do YouTube, I was like, I'm going to do YouTube, and I'm not really going to take calls from my video work anymore. I was like, I'm just going to kind of fade out of it. And when that happened, I started selling stuff on OfferUp and Facebook Marketplace, etc. And that was really funny because it wasn't really born out of desperation, but it was like this like attempt to try what we're doing now. I was like, maybe we could just start reselling stuff and have an easier time not having real jobs. And what's funny is all that story that we just talked about with me playing music, I think something I left out that's actually really important is all that time that I spent playing music, I was also a wheeler and dealer with musical instrument stuff. I bought and sold guitars like they were just pennies, like I was just throwing away pennies. Like I bought and sold, I probably played a couple hundred shows in my couple year career of playing music live. I played most of them with a different amp and or guitar every time. Like, I'm serious. I would be working at the store on a Thursday. I'd buy a guitar from a guy, play it Friday night, and sell it on Saturday morning. Like, it was just what I did, and I was good at it. And it's so funny looking back now. That was just training on what we did now. So for a while, our reselling life was like, I sold everything that wasn't bolted down on OfferUp, and we did really well. I remember one month, Hannah had her first great month on Depop and sold a couple grand, and we were like, wow.
Yeah.
But we were even more like, wow, because that same month we had sold a couple grand in furniture, and we'd get like, I think one of the first things that happened was I found this really hard to explain. Do you know what I'm talking about? What would you cabinet with the blue door?
A little shelf thing, but like a Not like a curio cabinet. It was like an upright shelf,
I
but small.
Well, I definitely have a picture of it somewhere, and maybe I'll try to find it. Maybe someone can comment below if there's a better name, because I wouldn't know what to call this thing. But I walk outside one day, right, and I find this cabinet sitting outside our door, and I think all that was wrong with it is one of the legs had fallen off. So I brought it back inside and glued it. I guess I glued the leg back on and just kind of cleaned it off after that. And I told her, Hannah's like, what are you doing with that? I was like, I'm going to sell it on OfferUp. And she's like, okay. I mean, it was clearly special because it was different, but it was almost cartoony. I think I found it.
Oh, yeah, you did. I was like, it was very mid-century modern feeling.
It was. Look at this thing. I can't believe I actually found it. Let me see if I can zoom in. Oh, now I'm showing your sewing machine. Right? So, like, blue door, blue legs, and then it's just a little shelf, right?
Yeah.
The drawer, okay, that's what was wrong. The drawer had fallen off its track, so I tacked the drawer rail back in. That was all I did to it. And I think I sold it for like $120.
Yeah, it was a good little flip.
And it was like that opened
the same day.
It was the same day too. Yeah, it opened the floodgates. Like this was before that month we made like $5,000. I was like, oh. And what was funny is we had just moved into this apartment too. My older brother had just moved in with us, and we were kind of financially supporting him just a little bit until he got on his feet, because he had never lived really outside of where we were from per se since he was a kid, and things were just kind of like we were just in a new part of our life, right? And other than you were trying to find something else to do with your life, you didn't really get into reselling as much as you fell into it, right?
Yeah.
And it ended up being the same for me, because I sold that cabinet and it wasn't weeks later we started picking up futons out of the trash. This 1 month I probably sold a dozen futons, because every college kid moving to town wanted one. So I would find the ones that weren't trash and that didn't need to be fumigated or anything, just needed a wipe and a new extra screw or some wood glue, and we just sold furniture. And then we started going to regular thrift stores in a serious way for the first time at this point. And basically, you can, from there, the path to where we are today, YouTube makes it a little bit complicated, but if you kind of take the YouTube away, it's just like, she had a good chance to get out of her job. She did, and we were like, we have to resell now. Mm-hmm. And YouTube made it a little bit different, and I think that's a good transition to the last portion of this conversation. YouTube has made it different for me because YouTube added on to our reselling has allowed me to this is hard to explain. It's allowed me to go back to dreaming a little bit too big like I used to, but for the first time in my life have some realistic chance to actually achieve some of the bigger things. So that being said, that's a tease for what I want to end the conversation on. But for me, tell the people now where you are now, if you are in a place where you solidly know what you want or not.
Short answer, no.
Okay.
I have ideas of things that I would like to do. One of them being, like, I'd like to start my own flea market situation, whether it be indoor, outdoor, or whatever.
You know what's really funny? Please don't lose your train of thought. It's so funny. I'm going to actually be really interested to listen back to this episode, because like at so many points we're on the same wavelength, and I want you guys to know Hannah had no idea what we were going to talk about today until we started recording. Hannah's like, what are we talking about? And I was like, our dreams, record.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't even know.
So I didn't tell you to say that, but we're gonna end up going the same direction here in our conversation.
Yeah, well, we have talked about it several times. I was like, I follow this girl on Instagram who is in Denver, who she sells and works at this little shop that is essentially like Urban Outfitters but consignment.
Okay.
So like it's very trendy looking. If you want to search it, it's called Old School Cool Denver.
Is it
I think that's what it's called. Yeah.
This is the website?
I think, yeah.
Is that what we want to look at? Okay. Old School Cool Vintage Fashion Market. Okay.
It's this market. It's this little store that all these different vendors put their clothes in, and you just go buy vintage clothing. And I thought it was so cool. It's so cute. And I was like, I feel like I could do something like that. Like I can gather a couple people here in Phoenix that I know love selling clothing, furniture, dishes, all that kind of stuff, and create a little market that is for like my age group. There's plenty of antique malls here, but those are marketed toward, the generation above us. And I know that there are vintage stores here in Phoenix that are marketed toward our age group, but I feel like there could always be a little more room to grow there. So I thought that would be something that would be really cool to do.
Okay, well, let me push you on the question here. I'm basically, I want to know what your like highest aspiration is. Is that it? And if it is, that's fine. But like, I want to know specifically where you're at on this journey of like, you've been asked since you were 12, what do you want to do? And if the answer is, I don't freaking know, I am more than fine with that, because I'm still a little resentful of how hard we were pushing this at 12. But like, I think this conversation's been so interesting because at a lot of points we've had the same wants and desires, but we've been on higher and lower like tiers of like actually getting there, right? Because there was a point where you were way more clear on the reselling thing than I was, and you know what I mean? So like this market idea that you're inspired to do, like, are you so sure this is what you need to do that you have plans to do it, or where are you at?
Well, I get a little bit stuck from that same question of like, what do you want to do? So like, if I do the market idea, then I am definitely following a path of one direction.
Right. It's going to be hard to do anything else.
Yeah. I'm going to be someone that owns markets. Like I can expand to several markets. I can have a bigger market. I sell clothing in a retail space. Like that is my path. But that's not necessarily what I want to do like 100%. Like I could definitely, someone that I really admire is Ela Klein.
Okay.
She has her own, fashion label brand. Like she does these really cool, her brand's called Teddy Fresh. She does these really cool streetwear color block kind of fun.
Yeah, you're not going to see this person on this website, but she's pretty much single-handedly designs all this stuff.
Yeah.
And makes an absolute killing. I don't know the value of her company, but I bet it's over $1 billion now.
Yeah, she makes a ton of money on it. It's all really cool stuff. Like I really love the things that she does, and it speaks to me from my creative aspects of like, if I had all the money and access to the things that I could, maybe I would want to make the same kind of stuff.
Well, let me see if I can. I don't want to speak for you, but I think I might have an easier time articulating this than you. I feel like there have been points, and maybe this is how I can clarify this. Maybe you're not here right now at this exact second, but I know there have been points where if you could do anything, if you could have any version of being a designer, clothes maker, this is what you would want. You would love to have a line of clothes that one could very easily look at and see the aesthetic of, right?
Yeah.
Because like, if I look at the different releases of Teddy Fresh, like they release a new collection every month or so, and it's always a little different, but like, like this is so you anyways.
Yeah.
Like some of this stuff is just so specific. And I don't know if we're going to get any great examples. I'll just show a little bit more of it. But like, there's definitely been a point where you've like wanted to find a way to be so specifically good at one style of design that you could just be known for it, right? Because right now there are a lot of people making this color block style fashion, which by the way, your jeans that you make custom and have sold an unbelievable amount of, they fit in this realm of design. And let's be honest, in this realm of design, even though everybody's kind of got some of this product, it's really Ela that is like going to be remembered for the color block style. It's her. I mean, she basically owns it at this point.
Yeah.
And so I've seen you in your wanting to be a designer, a clothes maker, to own some corner of the market like that.
Yeah. And it's something that is so that's something that's so outlandish to me. Like that is almost equivalent to me saying I want to be a designer for Chanel. Like it seems
such a big thing to do.
Unthinkable, unfathomable.
It's so funny. There's Oliver Tree in a Teddy Fresh, but see these color block hoodies.
Yeah,
everyone kind of has this stuff in their merch stores nowadays, but like
Yeah.
Hila's basically responsible for it, in my opinion. I should have just Googled their website this month is not as good a depiction as some of these pictures are.
Yeah.
This is so her.
It's just every single time she comes on the podcast wearing something different, I'm just like, yep, I'd wear that too. I wish I thought of that first.
Yeah. Well, this is another important part of the conversation. And this, I think it could get sticky here, so I have to be careful. But like, we have 11 or 12,000 subs on our YouTube. What are we getting close to? 12,000?
Yeah.
That's not very big, especially considering Hila and her husband Ethan's podcast channels, multi-million subs, and they've been around on YouTube for many, many, many more years than we have. But YouTube being thrown into the mix of what we do is it's this weird double-edged sword, right? Because it enables us to do what we do, right? It adds income. For me as an artistic person who wants to be artistic, it adds a certain level of drive. But I've never had anything that has the potential that YouTube can give. And I think Hila is probably a really good example of this. There's nothing more specifically responsible for her success than her clothing line. I want to be clear in saying this, right? Mm-hmm. She is a wonderfully artistic person, and that is why she is where she is. However, her and her husband being around on YouTube for a long time has had some bearing on, A, elevating her as a public person, B, opening doors where she is to walk around in that design world. So, like, YouTube is such a it's a wonderful potential for us. A lot of Hila's merch that she can sell sometimes has to do with her podcast audience. Certainly not all of it, because people like you, there's plenty of famous people walking around with Teddy Fresh on it. But like, for us, we're both into design. We've designed some T-shirts together and sold them quite successfully on our channel. Like, we've been blown away a couple of times how many of our T-shirts we've designed and sold. And like, this is the funny part, right? Because like, in the same way we had a conversation once upon a time, Hannah, what do you want to do? I want to sell clothing, but I can't. It's too expensive. And I'm like, you dumbass. Look at all this clothes at the bins. It's not expensive. It's happened again where it's like, well, I want to make, design, and sell clothing, but like, how do you do that? And I'm like, we've designed 3 shirts to date, and we've sold them all. And to be honest with you, they've been, I don't actually know how to easily bring up our merch store, which is really dumb. I have to go to one of our videos and then click on the link. But like, they've not been. Here's what I'm getting. They've not been fashionable. Do you know what I mean? Like, our merch store isn't full of full-on fashionable merch per se, right? Here's our Shark Tendo hoodie. Nothing super special. For my character animation design, this is pretty cool, right? But this is not a fashionable piece, right? But like, here, okay, then this was probably this is our second most popular merch. It was just a "Hello, my name is Trash" shirt. We sold, I don't know, at the time for that shirt, that was really surprising because we were even less large as we are now, and I don't know, we sold a couple hundred, and it felt really crazy. But like, we've had this conversation again where it's like, well, what's the difference? And here's an important question when it comes to this conversation. What's the difference between just doing what you want for the sake of artistic and passion? Like, where do you draw the line for doing art for art's sake and doing it for I don't want to say money, because that's not what it is, but like, we have a YouTube channel. If they're interested in buying your artistic designs, why not launch yourself into the career you want by starting there?
Yeah.
We have these conversations constantly, and this is where I want the conversation to go, and this is where we need to end up. Because you know what you want to do, and what I just said about our merch and stuff being a vehicle to get into design, and seeing kind of how that's kind of what Hila did, but not really, but sort of, is like, those are examples of us trying to talk about how to get where we're going, but not knowing exactly how to get there. But I want you to finish up talking about what you want and what you want to do, because I can end this conversation with being very clear about what I want to do. And I've got a lot to say also about your market idea.
Yeah, well, it's just that's the crux I'm at right now. It's like, well, whichever decision I make is a path forward. It doesn't necessarily mean I can't do the other one, but it is definitely like a bold step toward one of them, and I need to decide what it looks like 5 years from now whenever I've made that decision. What it looks like 10 years from now whenever I made that decision. Am I okay with the fallout of it, whether it be good or bad, the workload, the good and bad things that come with career choices. So it's like,
Right.
I need to really take a hard look at it and be like, okay, this is where I want to go. So that's where I'm at.
That's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine to not have a super bold answer, because to be honest with you, before we started this channel, I certainly didn't have it. And to be honest, starting this channel was completely born out of this fear that perhaps I had. It's a bit cliche to say, but this fear that I had that maybe I had peaked. I had made a couple movies that weren't great, but they weren't bad, but it was really cool that I had made a movie, and it's kind of the same. Like, I had made an album once. Was it good? Not really. I was really young and wasn't that good yet, but I made it, and that was so much more than the 9 out of 10 people who were doing what I was doing at that age at that time, right? So I feel like I came to this point where I was like, oh, I peaked. I got to go get a job and dwindle down into life, or maybe the next best thing I do is just fatherhood, and it's going to end there. These are all realistic thoughts that we all have. So I started our YouTube channel out of that. I was like, no, I got to do something else. I don't feel like I've done enough. So we started our YouTube channel, and I had a lot of deliberation about what to start it about. There was a way in which maybe I want to do a talk show type thing and talk about modern topics and do something very specific in that regard. There was an idea I had for YouTube to make it about movie making, to use it as a vehicle to continue to make films like I was at the time. But honestly, at that time, I was a little bit burnt out on movie making, and that wasn't going to be it. And thrifting kind of had presented itself to us, and we were starting to be very serious about it this time. And I just, on a whim one day, started going to the thrift store with a GoPro, which I think at the time was like a GoPro 5, and I just filmed something. I made an episode, and some people watched it. And it's really hard to explain this to you. I've done a lot of stuff to get a lot of attention in my life. Music. Well, it wasn't always that I wanted attention. I'm sure there's some aspect of that in our psyches, but it was just more so, no, this is what I want to do, but it'll never be successful unless people watch. So what's the ploy to get people to watch? I'll be honest with you. I never got quite the gratification I was looking for in this way with music or anything else I did, but I made this YouTube video, and people were like, this is cool. Keep doing this. And I'm talking random strangers on YouTube as well as other people in my life. Were like, you've got something here, Thankfully, I had some people talking sense to me, just saying, I don't know what it is, you've got something here, find out what you did right here, keep doing it. So we go to making all these YouTube videos, and before I know it, we're a year into doing it every day. And I don't have to recap this whole story to make you understand the nugget of truth that is in here, that like we had some drive to do things that served us well in this whole journey that we're talking about. And so I don't know where it started to become clear what I wanted to do, but somewhere along the way, there was a way in which every desire I had as far as like dreams for the future started to come together. Because there's a lot I left out of this story, but like Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've had, even before this channel, an innumerable number of conversations about this weird desire I had to have a space, a building of my own, to do whatever I wanted in, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of people hope to have a cool man cave one day, or a garage to work on, just have their tools in one place. And these are all great things that I understand. But I'm just, even when I was a kid, I would draw pictures, and I learned how to draw blueprints properly once in high school to draw this space that I wanted. I think the earliest version that I would tell people was I wanted a warehouse, and I wanted a stairway in the middle of it up to my bedroom living quarters. But basically, I wanted to be able to come down out of my bedroom and have 100 square feet over there that's a band set up with a recording studio, but out in the open, not even walled off, which specifically for that is hard because of acoustics for recording. But the idea was just I could walk down my stairs from my home and just record music if I wanted to. But I could walk over there. There's a green screen set up in a studio to do video stuff. And I'm talking tons of room. If I wanted to build a set and shoot a sitcom style thing this week, I wanted to be able to do that. I wanted to be able to walk over the other way and have my gaming set up completely on its own, plugged up, nothing, anything you could ever basically want. I wanted to be able to walk down a set of stairs and walk directly to it and be able to address said objects and have them work with their intended form of operation, whether it be TVs turning on. I didn't want to plug stuff up because even when I was a kid and I had a little recording studio room in high school, and I had a computer and a microphone and I was doing that thing. It was always difficult to do because you had to plug stuff up, and I've always had this phobia of having to dig for crap to get something else to work. And so from early on, I had this dream of like, I have to have this space to do these cool things. So that's one little bitty thing about me. Like, you may find that interesting, you may not. You may understand that, you may not. But I've had an obsession with that forever. Forever and ever and ever, I've been obsessed with this idea of this perfect space for me and my creativity. And now, what does that have to do with what we're talking about? Well, the realistic thing about most of our dreams, big or small, is that, and Hannah's made this point pretty well so far, and I think I can sum it up and put a button on it. You don't just walk out of your house and accomplish your dreams, right? You don't just go work for Chanel. You don't, is that what it was? Coco Chanel? Yeah. You don't just do these things. Can I walk out my door right now as a full-time YouTuber, full-time reseller, and pay for a huge space to do what I want in? Absolutely not, especially not in Phoenix, because A, the prices of rental are high, and B, the prices of keeping a place cool throughout the summer can rival rent. Do you know what I mean? So the realistic thing is, like, I've come to this point in my life where, like, I almost have to have these things. It's become an obsession to find this space and do this thing that I want. And it never made so much, little dreams I had, like this dream for a space of my own, never made as much sense as it did when we started YouTube. And all of a sudden I was like, you know what? Like, I grew up watching like Rob Dyrdek's Fantasy Factory. Mm-hmm. And who didn't as a teenager watch that and think, I need a space to do this in? Mm-hmm. Which, to be honest, my dream for this kind of space wasn't inspired by Fantasy Factory, but I remember seeing it and being like, he gets it, you know? Rob Dyrdek gets it. So part of me just went, oh my God, if I had this space to do this crazy stuff, how conducive would that be to YouTube, right? Mm-hmm. How much better could our videos be if these shelves were multiplied by 10 and we're a whole corner of a warehouse, and we could just go to the I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of people watching for resale purposes that are into it. That's what they're into here watching. There's some people that are just kind of into our couple dynamic personality kind of thing. There's some people that are into, there's 10 different things about our channel that could bring you here that you could be into varying levels of in a combination. You're not just here for one simple thing. And I understand this. You guys have helped me understand this more than I could have ever asked for. But I don't know how to say this. I don't necessarily want to be a reseller. I don't not want to be a reseller, right? But what I want to do, and this is solid. This is like one of my ultimate top of the bucket list things. I want to have a space where we can continue to do what we're doing, whether it includes reselling or collecting or not, both. I don't know, but like what I'm getting at is I can't afford to do it. Maybe one day our YouTube channel is way bigger and it can afford to do it. And let's be honest, there is way more potential to make money on YouTube than there ever was in our corporate jobs that we had. That's a point I've been trying to make, and I don't know if I've made it very clear at this point. But YouTube, there is a realistic possibility that simply from having this channel 2 years from now, I could afford to buy 4 times more of these shelves on the way to that 10 times more of these shelves and put them in a space and make slightly different content for you guys. Just with this, all that stuff's a pipe dream, right? Without YouTube or without an online platform like we have. And so where I'm at now is like, I know exactly what I want. I want to have this space to do this thing, but how do I do it? And what's really funny is currently, and I've went through a lot of iterations in my head on how to get there. What's so funny about you saying that as an answer to like, what do you want to do, is I'm pretty sure that the next step for me is probably going to be opening some sort of store to transition to this and or start this kind of thing, because I watched a video the other day. There was these guys, they make Yu-Gi-Oh related content, but they went to this store in LA. It's just north of Anaheim. There's a city in the LA area. It's kind of near San Bernardino as well. It's called City of Industry. That's the name of the town. And I don't know if we never went while we were in LA to this town, or if it's easy to just kind of fly through it on the way to San Bernardino or something. Some of you LA people might be familiar with it, but what's funny is since we started this video, I've had this tab open, and I'm very excited to show you this. There's this store called Frank and Son Collectible Show. I don't know their history. Maybe someone watching could enlighten us a little bit on exactly what this place is and does. But it looks to me like they perhaps had some sort of traveling convention type thing they did and finally decided to just open up a permanent shop. But they're in an old Sam's Club. So this is, you guys know how big a Sam's Club is. Come to find out, their store is essentially just like our antique malls, which is to say it's a large open space with sectioned off certain size booths that vendors can come sell in. One big difference, however, and I don't know if we've discussed this far because I've only kind of showed you this place on video and stuff. Our antique malls, you don't have to be there.
Yeah.
Which thankfully, or we probably wouldn't be doing it. It wouldn't be quite enough money to be worth our full time. But we drop stuff off at our antique malls with price tags on them, and our booth number and sales are tallied at a front desk for what we've sold with stuff that has our number on it. This place, Frank and Son's Collectible Show, you have to be there. You basically get your own little storefront inside this antique type mall thing. And I don't know how to explain this to you, but I just never considered this. I'd never considered, you know what? We're in a big city. Rent is high. Rent is hard. Why not open a store to make it available for other sailors, but easier, right? Because different cities are going to be different with different zoning laws and other kind of local restrictions and rules and municipalities. That is all this stuff. Some places it may not be easy to do this kind of thing, but like it's really difficult to open a business in some states and cities and get insurances for vehicles and spaces and all this other stuff. And no doubt the people that are vending inside of this market that I'm showing you have to have business licenses, and et cetera. But I guarantee you there are plenty of people selling here that it's 1,000 times easier than them renting their own space. And I saw this and just thought, man, this is just next level. I'm trying to find some good pictures here. This Frank and Son's Collectible Show, it looks just like our antique malls. Go watch our videos, but it's only nerd culture, anime, Pokemon, Digimon. They've got a whole Yu-Gi-Oh section, cartoon stuff. I'm sure they've got some sports collectibles. It's all collectible stuff. And I saw this and I was just like, I have to go there. I mean, like, look at this wall of Pops. We've got a collectible type store here in Phoenix that has a big room of Pops, but it's got nothing on that wall of Pops.
Yeah.
I'm not even into Pops, but wow, right? And I saw this, and it just, I don't know how to explain this to you. It smacked me up against my head because what I want to do is I want to make our videos about collecting a little bit more than reselling. And I think if you've watched us for a long period of time, you'll have noticed this, right? I very clearly show more passion for that. That's why our channel is not one that you'll see a lot of like videos that are way more just about what we've sold and what we're making money on. I mean, we do a little of that. We've made some instructional material about our antique mall reselling because I feel like I have felt like in the past that that's not something there's enough content about, right? People don't understand that they can do this kind of reselling in this way. So I've focused on that kind of thing a little bit more just because of that, because I saw a place for it on the internet. But otherwise, like, our burning passion is not reselling. And if you're watching, because I know there's plenty of people watching that are reselling, I'm very curious if what part of your passions and future does that fit into. There's plenty of people that will say it's just extra money for me and my kids, and that's great. That makes me very happy, because growing up, my family's dabbling in kind of reselling, that kind of thing, was very similar to that, just extra money. There's some people that have very recently, because of COVID, transitioned into doing way more of it, and that's really cool. There's a lot of answers it could be. But what's funny is, I personally, doing what we do for a living, I know some resellers who that is their life. That is their chemical makeup. They're never not going to be a hustler. And that's very interesting, and I appreciate those people, especially the ones that are honest about it. There is just a certain type of person that is who they and what they are, is a hustler, a go-getter, a reseller. And if that's you, please comment below. I mean, include yourself in this conversation. But I'm saying this because I want something else. But I know for a fact, because of what I've learned about the world, I can't just have it. I think we all learn this at a certain age, right? So what stepping stones do I need to build for myself to get there? And honestly, at this point, I have two chances to get what I want. Do you understand? One of them is for me to be as passionate as I can about this YouTube, to where the money one day takes care of itself and I can do what I want. Because someone who has 1 million subs and gets a couple 100,000 views a day has enough money to make some things happen. Do you understand what I'm saying? At the height of our YouTube channel, we were getting about 20,000 views a day. Every single day, that's not true. We were about 20,000 views, and maybe 13 or so thousand individual people that were revolving our channel in one day. And it's not like we've come down from that height. It's a little bit different to explain those analytics, because we're now doing 2 videos a week. So it's not quite 20,000 every single day, but it's like on the day of posting a video, it's about 5,000 views on our daily video, or on our new video, and another 5 to 10 of people watching a couple more of our older videos, because people like watching 2 or 3 at a time. So, the path to 1 million subs looks very difficult, which is funny to say, because there's so many people who have in recent times addressed us like we're some huge YouTubers, and it's like, I'm sitting here watching my friends like Rick shoot up to 100,000 subs, and I'm just like, I'm very happy for him, but I can't imagine it, right? But it's very funny, because we knew him at 30,000 subs, and I remember us talking, and him talking about how far away 100,000 looked. It just seems so big and so far, but like, he's gonna hit it. He's gonna hit it soon. And if you do what we do, and you do it well enough and consistent enough, which I'm not the one to judge whether or not we are doing it that well, but when you do what we do on YouTube, if you do it well, you can hope for some manner of success. And I'm just kind of sitting around at this point in our lives and waiting for it. But I'm not, and this is a very honest truth about myself that I'm going to try to be honest with you. I'm not one for waiting. I'm on anything. I'm just not. I'm not a sit around and hope. I'm not just some hopeful idiot. So if there's a reality that our YouTube, because of a huge mix of things, the community that we're in, which is the YouTube resell, kind of a little bit of a mix of retail, video game, clothes, we're a weird amalgamation of things. Because of that, because of our personalities and our age and our demographics that we reach, there's a good chance that perhaps maybe our current format is not going to reach more than, let's just say, after 5 or 6 years, 100,000 people. Listen, you all probably watch a YouTuber or two that you can't imagine why they're not bigger. And it's a really weird thing. I'm not going to name any names, because I don't want this to go south and become any sort of personality conversation. But like, there's YouTubers that you watch that I'm kind of like, can't quite get into it, and I don't know why. And vice versa. Some that I watch, you're just like, whatever. Or like, there's this couple that I really like what they're doing in this one realm of YouTube. But like, I like what they're doing, but it's hard for me to get used to their personalities. But I watch it anyways, because I'm like, it's so silly. Because like, there's plenty of people that watch us and hear me say the things I say and make the jokes I make. And my personality is very kind of set in stone. I just am who I am, and I use the same words that I use the whole time. And some people don't get it. Like, I remember early on, I always say, like, if something falls, I just go rip, you know, or I say lol sometimes. And I say LUL, lol, instead of saying LOL or laughing, I'll go lol. And I remember very early on not being as conscious as I am now of the repetitive way in which I say things. And I remember people commenting, I like this channel, but I can't watch because I keep saying rip. And I'm like, okay. And I would just reply rip. Like, what am I going to do? What do you want me to do? But this is an interesting conversation because, like, some people get pigeonholed because the weird amalgamation that is their target demographic, their personalities, and I mean, pretty much that and a couple other factors. Some people don't have the headroom to grow that big. Maybe they do once they stick around long enough and learn, but everyone that's a million sub YouTuber plus has a very long story of how they got there. Well, some people get lucky and get there way quicker. And I know it may seem like I'm rambling, but I do kind of have an outline in my head. Remember earlier in this conversation we were talking about outlines? Like, I know how to get to my final point, and I've got a couple more points to make, but we had a really good trajectory for a while when we started doing daily videos, and I thought that was it. And I kind of told myself, if it takes 10 years of daily posting or something to get us to whatever, like, I'm down. I can do it. And we were rewarded for it. There was a point, I think there was 1 month where we got like 2,000 subs in 1 month. It was our big jump from like 5,000 to 7,000 subs. And I was like, this is it. If we start doing 2,000 subs a month, I mean, do the math, into the years, this and that. Because what I knew is if I could get to where we were getting 50,000 views every 24-hour period, like, that's where I calculated that's enough money for us to have full-time pay plus disposable income to do this YouTube thing I want to do. But of course, that momentum comes and goes really quick when you're a YouTuber, and I've got a lot of YouTube friends that can back that up. You don't know why a video goes viral, but it does. You get a few thousand subs, and then you feel like you're suffocated after that because it goes back to normal. And we're in a pretty elongated period of normal right now, which isn't to say we're not growing. There's plenty of you people here who are watching that are pretty new. Shout out to you guys. Thanks for hanging out with us. But this game that we're playing with YouTube is such a funny one because someone has to land on our content. It has to be interesting to them because they're into thrifting video games or whatever you might be here for. But they have to also not be annoyed by us, I can't tell you how comfortable I am with that. If someone comes in and is like, oh, I can't stand her voice, his laugh, I can't tell you how comfortable I am with you just moving the F on, because, like, that's just how YouTube works. We've all clicked on a video that we probably would have watched longer if we vibed more with that person's personality. That's how YouTube works. So this is all a long way of saying I want to find a way either to get YouTube to reach us to that point where I can have the money to do exactly what I want, to have a space to make basically what we're already doing here, but times 1,000. Just this crazy. I want to swim in a pool of Furbies, like Mr. Beast, but with thrifted nonsense. I want to buy a semi truck and get my CDL license and go buy out barns full of junk and bring it back to our space and do crazy stuff with. Okay, I know I've taken a long way to get here, but so if YouTube can't pay for it, my only other option, I feel like at this point, is a store, a market. Now, this is interesting because we have had conversations with this. Neither one of us knew we were going to go here for this conversation, but we have discussed in the past that, like, we're closer and closer to a point in life where, like, yeah, we like traveling and we like doing this stuff, but, like, if it's time to have kids, well, let's settle down, maybe open a shop, have kind of some permanent roots until the kid's old enough to travel. We can go do some cool stuff with him or her. So a store, anytime we bring it up on the channel, people can very much so be like, well, you got to be careful. My dad opened a store, and it was such a burden because he never could do anything else. Like, I'm aware it's going to be very hard for me to open a store without the resources to, like, make sure that I'm not 365 days a year glued to that place, and I can still go when I have to. But, you know, I also know, like, well, maybe I have to know for a fact I can't leave town for a whole year, a whole 2 years to get it started. Great, whatever. But, like, after finding out about this store, and I haven't visited it yet because I'm afraid to, because I'm afraid of almost being too inspired. And do you remember visiting the video game museum in Texas? It was another step in this like journey I'm on of imagining this space, because I saw this place and I was like, and I remember go back and watch our video touring the video game museum in Texas. I said, I don't know exactly what I said, but I said to some degree, like, this is what I want. You know, this is a glimpse of how my brain works, what I want to do with my collection and stuff. So right now I'm living in this world where I'm dreaming about opening some sort of the possibility. I'm not even on a path where I'm like, this is what I've got to do, because this is the path, right? Either YouTube takes care of it or I have to do something to brute force it into reality. And that's honestly more realistic because, you know, YouTube's not just handing out cookies here. But imagine this. Basically imagine, if you will, if you want to know what Tendo dreams of, imagine this really cool store that has all this nerd stuff on it. You walk into it and you're like, this is like a Walmart. I'm pretty sure that's Post Malone standing in this collector store I'm talking about. That's hilarious. But imagine you walk inside of this building and it has, on every wall, it has Hot Wheels, action figures, video games, trading cards, collectible coins, all the fun stuff that makes this channel what it is, right? There's some vendor that's selling Furbies and McDonald's toys and just weird stuff, right? And you're walking around this place and you're thinking to yourself, man, this is my favorite store I've ever been in. There's a freaking food court over there with some awesome foods. Like, this is a cool environment. I'm happy to be here. But then oh wait, some YouTuber that I think I vaguely heard of back in the day is running this place. And you get to the back of the store, and there's this doorway into a different section of the building. And you walk inside this doorway, and it is yellow. It is insanely yellow. And there are these shelves that are 2 stories high. And you start walking in a circle around this room. Not a lot in the middle. Just this room full of crap. And you start realizing that anything you ever addressed in your childhood, whether you're my age and it was Furby, Tamagotchi, Pokemon cards, maybe you're a little younger than I am and it's Ben 10 and it's some other cartoons from that era, right? Like, what's your thing, Hannah, from the age of 9 to 12? SpongeBob.
SpongeBob, probably.
There's a shelf full of SpongeBob stuff. And then you're looking around and maybe you didn't know that this place was owned by a YouTuber, and you see a couple different places where there's some sort of literature or signage that tells you this was all put together by this YouTuber. Or forget this version of the story. You guys have been watching us for a long time. You see that we've opened up a store and you go to it and you start recognizing things on these shelves that you've either seen us buy or perhaps you've sent us a package and you're like, I gave Tendo this Furby. Here it is. This is what I want. I want to make these videos specifically about running around this country, if not just this town, whatever it takes to open the space, doing crazy things, buying huge lots of things, and curating this crazy collection that we already have that you don't even see all of, because you're seeing a third of the collection on screen. There's 2/3 off of it still in this room. Well, now my fraction's off, but there's about this much stuff already that's in storage that I can't bring myself to get away from, because I have so long been working towards this hoarder fever dream, right? So much so that, like, if I were to do this, if someone were to say, Tendo, open your museum type thing or whatever you want to call it in this space right now, like, do it. Like, I would, obviously I'm talking on 2 different wavelengths here. There's kind of a version of where, like, I have to sell stuff, and there's a version where I don't. If I have to sell stuff, I want to have stuff for sale than stuff that's just on display. There are cabinet doors that go on these shelves that IKEA makes that I've collected several of and put in my storage unit, because I know one day, like, this is going to be an expensive endeavor if we ever have to do this, right? To the point where, like, I've collected stuff for years to do this kind of thing. So this whole conversation today wasn't just a conversation in which I was leading up to talking about this kind of store space I want to open. And I want to have a little bit more conversation here because it's important to note that like we have two wildly different ideas for a store. Mm-hmm. And we are constantly in conversations about how to reconcile it and do both separate and together or not. And it's a conversation that's nowhere near over. It's a conversation that we don't know the answers to because obviously a store that is for fancy girl jeans is not really one that typically would be one that also has a bunch of Pikachus in it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there's a lot of ways in which we can work towards what we're talking about and just open our own antique mall of sorts, right? Maybe not call it an antique mall, our own vendor mall. And it can have antiques if people want to sell it there, but it can also have the nerd stuff. It can also have the clothing stuff and just be another general place. Maybe we do that one day in preparation for the next place. But like if we do, there's no doubt that there's going to be a corner of it that's set up with locked case glass, acrylic covered cases with the cool stuff that our YouTube channel gathered. I just don't know how in the next 2 or 3 years I don't find a way to do a smaller version of that at first. And honestly, this is our living room we're sitting in, right? We don't have a couch and a TV. We don't have friends over, which is going to have to change soon because we've been here long enough. We've made enough friends, and it is really for the first time in the last year been a problem that we don't have space to entertain friends. Yeah. And it was never a problem in our lives before, but now that it is, like we definitely now know we need a space to do this YouTube thing in and to have a bit more of a life at home. But Hannah, tell me, I have a couple more questions for you regarding this, but tell me, with everything I just said, do you understand any of it? Do you understand like what my big picture is, what I want?
Well, yeah.
But totally. Do you understand it because we've talked about it before, or do you understand it because what I just said made sense, or was it gibberish?
I think both. We've talked about it a lot, so yeah. I can picture it a lot easier than I'm sure everybody else is going to because like I know what you're talking about. But
well, I don't know. It's a pipe dream though, right? But like what I'm really interested sometimes in this conversation, I'm thinking about a conversation I had with a friend out of high school into college that once told me I was a little bit too big of a dreamer and I needed to slow down. And like I definitely know where she was coming from when she said this. But at the same time, like I'm definitely setting at a point in my life. Like tell me, I mean seriously, comment below. Would any of you be surprised if I clickbaited a video tomorrow that I bought a warehouse or I opened a warehouse or we got our own shop or something where like all of a sudden my videos were just like us going crazy doing weird displays with our Bratz dolls and Furbies, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like I don't think there's a lot of people that wouldn't be surprised watching us.
I think there'd be a lot of people that would be very excited to see that.
Yeah. There'd be plenty either way. So that's it. That's but I think it'd be very easy to leave this conversation feeling like it was all about what I want to do, and I really want it to be. I want this conversation. I want the person listening to this. If you watched all the way, what does that say? 2 hours, 33 minutes. Let us know if you're still here. I want the person that listened all the way through this to understand that I had a dream from a very young age that seemed impossible. This space. I've always wanted this space to do music and art and paint and whatever. I want to wake up any given day and do whatever I want. And the only thing that has ever finally opened that door was thrifting and then now YouTube. And thrifting is such a big part of it because even if we had 1 million subs tomorrow, there's still no easy way to afford all of that, right. Except for the fact that we would buy it all used at thrift. You guys don't see it, but there's a whole workshop worth of tools right there that are very expensive that I got for pennies on the dollar at the thrift. There is like $1,000 worth of fancy. I'm talking the fanciest paint for painting on canvas that money can buy. Thrifted. All
Goodwill
thrifted.
Bins.
Yeah, and your sewing setup is a very capable, very well thought out layout, all thrifted.
Yeah, except for the sewing machine, but
Well, I mean, even that, it's fine. It just one of these days we need to buy you a big bad upgrade, but it's just important to understand that like if you're watching and there's something you want to do. The way to do the craziest things you've ever wanted to do are going to come with a lot of risk, but it doesn't even have to be that much risk if risk is something you're afraid of, because that's something we differ on. I'm what did Dan say the other day? Risk it for the biscuit. I'm all about that mentality. I'll throw everything we have. Like we were joking the other day, weren't we? Like we really do need a nice sprinter to build into a roll around home. And I was like, I wish somebody would roll up and say, you know what? I'll buy your video game collection for, well, this is the problem. When you sell a collection like this in bulk, you can, if you're lucky, you can hope to get half its value. And the value sitting here is only like 30 grand. And like 15 is not enough to buy and renovate a cab. So I was like, maybe it'll get to 50 and someone will be like, I'll give you, 25 for your whole collection. And I'll be like, well, I'm going to at least think about that. I wouldn't want to, because again, I want this collection to end up on display in this cool space one day. I have this dream. But that's the kind of risk I'm willing to take. Like, I'll throw it all away right now to open a different avenue to do what we're talking about in a different way, right? Because I would love to go spend a lot of time on the road. And if you're watching, you might be like, well, you have the bread truck. And it's like, yeah, but it's none of it's as easy as you think. So Hannah, what do you really think's next for us, or for you, or for me? Because like, obviously we don't just have a plan here. I think I have an end goal. I know what I would die happy if I was, that would be a great peak for me, to have the sustainability, to have a huge space that maybe has a store up front, but is way more of an experiential type place in the back, right? Mm-hmm. If I get to that point and then I'm making cool videos about that space and what I do to it, and that, I think that would be, for the first time in my life, I feel like I would see satisfaction in the accomplishing of a goal, right? Where are you at on that kind of like scale of things? Like, do you think it's time to open a store and you'd be happy if you did, or what do you feel?
I really don't know. I don't really have an answer to that.
And it's fine if you don't. I don't want to pressure you into an answer. I'm not the guy asking you what you want to do when you're old. You have to say dentist, right? Yeah. I don't want to be that guy to you, but I just want to make sure. Obviously, this last 20 minutes or so, I talked pretty hard because I do have the answer, and I want to give you the chance to. I don't want to feel like it's just like, here's what I want to do in a podcast.
Right. I mean, I'm very much in a state of limbo right now, because like I've been so focused on what I've been doing right now that thinking any farther ahead is not something that I've given a lot of time. So it's a little hard for me to answer that question, because like I mentioned before, my two avenues that I have to go down for my personal goals, I have to pick one.
Right.
And I don't know which to pick. I think my short-term goals are probably like, I need to finish up the workload that I have so that I can continue designing new things. So my short-term is leaning me toward the design portion, whereas I think realistically, for like a big step, it's more achievable for us to open a store.
Right.
So that's exactly where my two things they collide.
I'm with you. I think our real path forward is very much going to be a hybrid of the two pictures that I've laid out. Either YouTube's going to provide more money to do something cool, or vice versa, or I'm going to brute force something like a store. It'll more likely be like, because we're already on this path where we're making more money than we did last year. We made more money last year than we did the year before, and like, we don't need to go too much further up to where I can finally go, you know what? There's enough extra money to open a store, right? And there's enough extra money with what we're doing that if we work a little hard for a year, a little extra, real hard for a year, like, we can get the store up and going and taking care of itself, which is funny to say, because a lot of people think whenever we've talked about opening a store in the past that we don't understand how much work it takes. And and I tell people all the time, like, you don't understand the work it takes to do daily videos. I understand the daily grind. And part of me is kind of ready for it, because like I did the daily grind of daily YouTube videos was a great education, kind of on hard work for myself. I found my limits in doing that. So,
well, I also opened up a store here in Phoenix for the bridal salon.
For someone else.
I've done it before.
You've done it with someone else's money.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. Like, we just totally have the we have the tools that we need to do it. So to kind of wind this conversation down, I think that my next goal in this kind of conversation, and maybe we'll update you guys one day soon, I'm going to go to the store I showed you guys. I don't know when. It's in Anaheim. It's not that far away. It's about 5 hours from us. If you're watching and you know anything about the area and that store specifically, definitely reach out to me and tell me what you know. I'd love to know more about it. But I'm going to go to it, and I know what's going to happen. I'm going to leave it really inspired like I did that time, as I said earlier, that we went to the video game museum in Texas. And I'm going to kind of go from there. We have the ability for the first time in our lives to save some money if we have to, and we could certainly save some and come up with a game plan for a store. But, we really, I think the thing that I need to make clear is I'm so well aware that, like, we have to go into it with such a serious amount of planning. And like, okay, Dallas, you want this huge store with all these vendors and a food court and a separate room for display, right? I mean, you're talking about this. And obviously, no amount of saving in the world over the course of a year or two is going to allow me to do that at first. So it's like, it's such a hard thing being an adult at this point in my life, because like I go, obviously, I need a 5-year plan to get to that, because the first year the store's going to have to be here and do this and then move to here and do that. You know what I mean? And I think that's probably what sucks the most about turning 32 is like, I know now I have to be responsible and do these things. And, I know for a fact I can't just have the store tomorrow. So we will continue to update you guys on these hopes and dreams. Not a lot, because like obviously I don't just want to make a bunch of content about what I want to do. What I want to do is get off of here and make my next collection video about something cool in this room. But we just are squarely exactly where we are right now, and we're aware of where we are. So you guys definitely comment below, please, if you haven't already. I know I asked for several comments along the way, but if you haven't done it yet, I'd love to know. I'd love if you could in some way condense, and not if you don't want to condense, our Discord's a perfect. I want you to comment on this video, but our Discord's a perfect place if you want to type something longer. Definitely come over to our Discord today and just reference this podcast and tell us how your dreams might have changed from when you were young to where you are now. I'd love to keep this conversation going, because I mean, I'm hoping some people watching heard us say something about how we got to where we are, and heard something that they're like, oh yeah, me too, because you said no less than 6 things this whole conversation I didn't know about your journey here. Seriously, and I'm kind of amazed. So I'm hoping some of you can get some of that out of us, and then perhaps provide some of that kind of inspiration back to us, either in the comments below or over on our Discord. But that's going to be it. Hannah, any final thoughts?
Thanks for sticking around this entire podcast.
If you stuck around this far, thank you very much. And I want to try to leave you guys with some manner of encouragement. I hope we already have, but if not, please, if you have bigger dreams that seem bigger than possible, try to find a way to brute force them into reality. That, my whole story about my music and band and all that other stuff was all a long way into telling you that I just did whatever it took to make it happen over a long period of time.
I think my biggest lesson that I think I should have learned a long time ago, that if someone had just explained it to me sooner, I would have maybe thought better, is that try to think outside the box a little bit. I got so hindered by my narrow-mindedness and like not understanding that life it doesn't have to be in this box. Like, just try to
Well, we all grow up. We all grow up naive, right? Yeah. And listen, there's a whole part of this conversation that I didn't get into that I wanted to, but I felt like it's a little bit too much. But like, every plot point in the story that I told today was almost entirely driven by naivety, right? Yeah. Like, I only did some of the crazy things I did because no one told me that I couldn't.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the opposite of what you're saying, but also kind of the same. I almost never left my hometown, but someone I looked up to one day said, Dallas, you don't have to stay here. He was trying to politely tell me I didn't belong there. I wasn't fitting into that community and stuff. But what he told me was I didn't have to stay, and he was the only person to tell it to me. So I doubt that Hannah and I are important enough to any of you watching to be the people that you're going to listen to. But if I can give you any advice at all, there's nothing that you've been told that you can or can't do that really matters. I mean, if someone told you not to kill people, of course that matters. But
Definitely don't do that.
But I mean that life progression stuff.
Yeah.
If you're told you had to do this or no, none of it's true.
If you want to be a fashion designer, you don't have to work for Coco Chanel. You
Right.
can make your own clothes.
You can find your own path to it. We've shown you examples of how Hila did it. We want to be very artistic people in a very weird way that no one really understands until they see it. And we're building our path to it. I'm hoping that if you're watching and you watch this far, you can leave with just 1 ounce more of confidence to work towards that weird, perhaps creative, artistic, or otherwise awesome idea that you've had somewhere along your life. And if I can give you any more positivity to help you towards that goal, whatever that may be for you, please somehow reach out to us and let us know. I would love to, in one way or another, be some sort of positive help towards you for that kind of thing, because a lot of you watching have very much so been positive building blocks in this weird little castle of artistic expression that we're building here. I'm going to end it there with that little bit of poetry. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. You rock, and until next time, peace out.